Okay, I think we have a good number of us here now to get started, so let's kick things off. So, welcome everyone to today's training session. So, we have a full half day of training today on applying the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards. And this is truly a collaborative effort, this project, delivered across a number of organizations and really as a result of that demand that we're seeing in the market for more information and more capacity building on the IFRS S1 and S2 standards. So, firstly, a big thank you to the IFRS Foundation and IFC, our partners on this program, and of course, especially to the Amman Stock Exchange for hosting us today with today's training session. And finally, of course, thank you to all of you as participants for joining us. We really do appreciate the time that you're taking out of your day to join us and learn more about this topic. So to kick us off, we're going to have a few welcome remarks. And I'll be handing over to my colleague, Dr. Amira Agag from the IFC organization, part of the World Bank Group, as I said, our partners on this training. So Amira is the ESG projects lead for the MENA region, and she's here to join us to say a little bit about IFC's work in the region. So a big thank you, Amira, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fiona. Assalamu alaikum جميعا. Good morning, everybody. First, thank you for this kind invitation and the great collaboration on this important IFRS sustainability workshop with the UNSSE and Amman Stock Exchange, of course. IFC, UNSSE, and Amman Stock Exchange are pursuing this joint opportunity to strengthen company sustainability and climate disclosure and reporting capacity. And of course, with the aim to support Jordanian listed companies as they look to upgrade their disclosure to apply fully the IFRS requirements. For many years, the World Economic Forum assigned, environmental risks, including climate action failure and extreme weather as the top global risks. Definitely there is a need for material, decision useful sustainability and climate related information in annual reports and financial filings, to access a lot of funding that is available in order to benefit from. So there is an increased need for issuers to enhance their knowledge and actual practices of sustainability and climate-related disclosures. Because as you know, sustainability and climate disclosure is at the heart of the agenda of all the standard setters, and also the core and center of IFC operations and business. As you may know, IFC, or the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, is the largest development institution focused exclusively on the private sector in developing countries. So as such, we help countries develop their private sectors in a variety of ways. First, as an investor, IFC invests in companies through different tools. So as such, IFC invested $31.5 billion US dollars, including $7.7 billion in climate-related investments, such as clean energy, sustainable cities, climate smart agriculture, energy efficiency, green buildings, green bonds, and I think you can relate easily to Jordan as one of those examples. This essentially means that IFC is increasing its sustainability and climate finance, improving and expanding the work, focusing on the sustainability and climate results and impacts, reducing emissions, and climate vulnerability in key systems. So not just for us, but for most investors, by the way. Investing in sustainability and climate is a priority for them. and of course, a profitable business. So our analysis shows that 21 emerging market economies alone hold around 23 trillion US dollars in smart investment opportunities through 2030. Also, IFC as an advisor works for creating capital markets through advising businesses and regulators on enhancing policies and practices to encourage private investment and improve investment climate. And the clear example is our work and collaboration with the Amman Stock Exchange to issue the climate framework and guidance. So IFC has supported the preparation of more than 145 codes, laws, and frameworks in over 50 countries on corporate governance, sustainability, and disclosure. And also IFC offers a number of tools to support you and other markets to enhance comprehensive reporting. So you can actually look at IFC beyond the balance sheet platform, which is focused on disclosure and transparency. It's a great toolkit and platform that offers an ecosystem of resources and reporting tools to help companies on their journey toward a more open and transparent communication of material environmental, social, and governance factors. With this, I'm sure that you will have a great interactive session today. And thank you again for this kind invitation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Amira, for setting such excellent context there. And as you say, I think hopefully helpful timing for today's training session with so much going on locally in the market in Amman. So it's been fantastic to see that progress. And yeah, we hope we can dive into that a little bit more today and support the topic. And I've shared the link as well to the Beyond the Balance Sheet toolkit, which we'll come back to later in the session as well. So definitely a great resource for everyone to check out. Thank you again. Okay, with that, we'll be moving on to getting started with the session. So from my side, there's a few housekeeping points that I'll cover first off, and just a bit of an overview of today's agenda before we get into the content. So firstly, just in terms of how to use the controls within the session, you will probably have noticed by now that all participants are on mute. However, we really do still encourage you to make use of the interactive features in Zoom to interact with the session. So please make sure you're using the chat box as you're already doing, if you'd like to introduce yourself or make any general comments. And if you have any questions for the team, please put those in the Q&A box, which you'll see as well as an option within Zoom. And if you just make sure you ask questions there, that makes sure that we can see and directly respond to those questions, because sometimes if you post them in the chat, they might get a bit lost. So making sure to post any questions in that box as well. So we have a live 3.5 hour session together today. And as I said, we really encourage you to make the use of that opportunity to ask your questions throughout the session. So as I'm going to be introducing, we've got a number of experts here from the IFRS Foundation team. So hopefully a great opportunity to ask those specific questions that you've been thinking about. We also have a number of different ways we're going to be doing participation in the session. So we'll be using Menti and polls. So we'd really encourage you to take part in those exercises as well. And we'll also have an optional homework exercise, which you can take away to do in your own time. And we'll explain a little bit more about that later. And finally, for taking part in today's training, you are also eligible to receive a completion certificate. To do that, you'll need to stay with us throughout the live training session until the end. And at that point, we'll tell you how to access the survey, which you'll need to complete to get your certificate. So to introduce the team who are going to be delivering the training today, I'm Fiona from the SSE Academy team, and I'm joined by my colleague Lois. And then alongside us from the IFRS Foundation, we have Robert and Vanessa from the Capacity Building team as well. So hi there. So in terms of our learning objectives from today's session, firstly, we are looking to help you to understand the ISSB standards. We're then going to move on to thinking about how you can use the ISSB standards and really start to apply the concepts. And finally, we'll end by focusing on identifying the steps that you can take to develop a disclosure plan. So keep in mind throughout the session, those are the sort of three key areas we're aiming to move forward in today's session. So to break those learning objectives down into something a little bit more simple and easy to digest, we'll take it step by step. So we have 4 different modules that you'll see in that sort of wheel diagram on the screen there that we're going to work through in sequence. And here we just have an overview of the different modules there that we'll be covering. So firstly, in our prepare module, we'll be thinking around how to build on the existing knowledge you might have. So thinking about what the purpose of sustainability reporting is, how the landscape of reporting has evolved in recent years, and how the ISSB standards provide a global baseline for reporting. In Align, we're then going to move into setting the direction, so the track that you're on for reporting. So we'll think here about how to apply and utilize the ISSB standards and what additional disclosures you might need to add to your reporting versus voluntary frameworks you may have been previously using. And then in module 3, implement, we'll be thinking all around the practices and systems that you'll be using. So thinking about how to understand, identify, and integrate risks into your business model and strategy and to manage those issues on an ongoing basis. And then we'll round off with our final module, communicate. So this is all around the final format for your disclosures, thinking about the location and timing of your reporting and how to report efficiently and with confidence. And just to show you this in another way, this just shows how our time will break down in the session today. So you'll see we have a short break that we'll take in the middle of the session. We know 3.5 hours is a long time to be concentrating, so a short break just to refresh in the middle. And then that's how we'll work through the different aspects of the content, as well as finishing off with some further resources and next steps. Okay, so as I said, just a few things to highlight at the start. So firstly, as we've mentioned, we really encourage you to ask those questions throughout. We have, as I said, 4 facilitators today. So those of us who aren't speaking are well able to type and answer your questions in the background. So please feel free to ask us those as we go along. We'll also be referring today a number of times to the SSE training materials, which you'll be able to access from our website. So Lois has just shared the link a few messages above. Maybe I'll ask you just to post it again, Lois, if that's okay, just so it's right at the latest area of the chat. But from the link that Lois has shared to the event web page, so the web page link, that one provides you with the handout materials from today's training session. So there will be the handout from today, and there will also be a homework assignment that you can access from the web page there as well. We will also post the training recording from today's session onto that same event page as well. And I'll just share that link again with you so that you all have it. So just to be clear, it's this link here. Sorry, thank you, Lois. There you got that link as well. So that link there is where you can find the training slide handout if you want to follow along with the presentation and the homework assignment. So we'll come on to this later, but the homework assignment that you can download from this page, it's an optional exercise that you can do in your own time after the training program. There's no need to submit this to us and it's not mandatory. But if you follow the link and you find this at the bottom of the page in the resources section, this homework assignment helps you to really think about how to apply the concepts that we've covered in today's training and to help you to develop your first draft disclosure plan to implement the standards internally. So we hope this can be a helpful tool to continue to build on the experience from today's session. And a few other things just to highlight, I think Lois has also shared the link to this here. I know someone is saying that they're having an issue accessing the web page. Hopefully that works for others, but let us know if anyone else is having a problem, we can check. But I think that should be the correct link. So maybe try copying and pasting into your browser if it's not working there for you. Okay, but those are just a few key resources, as I said, we want to mention to start with. But to get us going on the interactive side of things, we've got a Menti exercise just to get started with. So Lois will just share the link in the chat with you in a second to access the Menti, and that will take you directly to the exercise that we can do together. And really what we wanted to know, first off, um, is I'm sorry, there's a few people having issues with that link, so apologies for that. We'll check that link and we can send that again in the chat if there's a problem. I'm sorry, I don't know why that's the case. But if you can access the Menti for now that Lois has shared the link to there, then that will take you into the interactive exercise we're just going to do together. So let me share the screen here. Okay, so when you join me in Menti, hopefully you can access it through that link that we've shared. There's also another couple of ways that you can choose to access Menti if you're having difficulties. So you can go to menti.com at the top of the screen there and enter that 8-digit code that you see. And you can also use that QR code that you'll see at the bottom of the screen there as well. So once you're in Menti, just a quick question for you to get a sense from you on your own words on what you've joined us for today. So what are your reasons for joining us in today's training? And great, I see our first response coming through there, so that's good. Okay, brilliant. So I'm seeing a number of different responses coming through. So we have enhancing reporting, developing knowledge, awareness, learning, ESG practices, um, climate disclosure, enhancing lots of kind of similar ideas, IFRS. Um, I'll give you all one more second, maybe just to let us know a few thoughts. Then we've got one more question for you before we move on. It's a good opportunity now to get used to using Menti because we're going to use it several times throughout the session. So good opportunity to make sure you can access and then you'll be able to come back to that through the training session as well. Brilliant, thanks. I see lots more of you have inputted now, so that's great. So yeah, I think hopefully we can help you in all those different areas today. This is indeed the focus of today's session, so that's great to get your sense. Thanks for taking part. So we're going to move on now to one further question for now. And this is just to get a sense really of your current kind of comfort and understanding of those 3 learning objectives that we talked about. So if you use that sliding scale that you have on the screen, you can let us know from maybe not comfortable on the left-hand side to very comfortable on the right-hand side of the scale, how you feel about those 3 different learning areas currently. And of course, there's no right or wrong answers here. It's just to get a sense really of where everyone is at today. So I'll just remove the QR code from there, but messages in the chat if anyone does need to see the QR code again, and we can show that again. Okay, brilliant. I see responses coming through now for this. So looking like a kind of a middling level of confidence, a bit of a range across the scale, as you'll see. So that dark color in the background shows us the range. So lots of different perspectives, but maybe on average we're sort of middling to slightly higher comfort. So great to know that you have some existing knowledge here to build on for the training, which is brilliant. So thanks for sharing that. Great. So I'll leave everyone to respond to that in the background if you'd like to, and then we're going to go back to the presentation for now. As I said, we will come back to Menti later in the session, so it's worth keeping that tab open in the background because any of the new questions will appear there for you as well. Moving in now to the first segment, which I'm going to take us through as a bit of an introduction before I hand over to my colleagues for more content. Just a few key things to start with. So firstly, just a quick disclaimer for you to read. So this is really just to be clear, we're going to be using a number of company examples in the training session today. And these are very simply here to help add some colour to what we're talking about. Sometimes we know that it can help to see a real example to put it into practice. However, the examples here shouldn't necessarily be seen as the best or perhaps the right way to approach this topic. Of course, we recognise that each company has very unique circumstances and you need to disclose in the way that's right for you. However, we hope that by sharing a few examples, we can give you some inspiration to get started. Okay, with that established, we'll now dive into getting started on Module 1, which, as I've said before, is all around building that solid foundation of knowledge, preparing you to apply the standards and build on those existing voluntary frameworks that we already had in place. So here we like to cover generally three important aspects. So we start with why to disclose sustainability information. We then think about how the landscape of disclosure guidance has evolved to reach the ISSB standards development. And finally, we give you an overview of the global baseline. So we look at some of the core concepts and requirements within the IFRS S1 and S2 standards. Okay, so to get us started, we'll dive into purpose and the why aspect. So here we're looking at the case for disclosure and some of those market drivers that might be leading you to focus on sustainability reporting. So to get us started with this, we've got a quick poll question just to get a sense from you as to what your key drivers are currently for disclosing sustainability related information. So a poll, I think, should have appeared on the screen for you now. Good, I see some responses. So you can select more than one answer here if there's more than one different driver that's causing you to be focused here. But let us know which of these drivers here are the key ones for you in terms of why you're focusing on sustainability reporting. So is it relating to regulatory requirements? Maybe relating to wanting to share proactively your own management's objectives and strategy? Perhaps there's some peer pressure from companies in the same sector who are setting expectations and reporting as well. Maybe your investors are asking you for this information. Or perhaps you have other reasons as well. So feel free to message in the chat if there's something else you want to highlight. And of course, we know that some of you might just be getting started with thinking about the case for disclosure. So maybe you're not reporting yet at all, and that's fine, of course, too. So we definitely like to encourage interaction in these sessions. So we'll have a number of polls throughout, and we do really encourage you to take part. We always try and get to around 50% of you who participated. So I'll give it another few seconds for people to put their responses in before we close the poll. I see just about 40% of people have taken part so far, but we do really love to have your interaction and engagement. So we'd encourage you to take part if you can. If you do have any issues accessing the poll, also feel free to share the selections that you would make in the chat with us as well. Okay, I think we'll close the poll there and I'll share those results with you. Okay, so it looks like the regulatory requirements are coming out as the top driver here, which I guess is kind of unsurprising given the context that we talked about at the start with Amira, with the implementation of S2. So of course that's understandable. But I see a number of you also highlighting in particular sharing your own management's objectives and investor interest as particularly key. So thanks for letting us know that. So stop sharing the poll there. You might just need to close down the poll screen from your view as well so that you can get back to the presentation. And then we'll dive into a little bit more about understanding some of these drivers. So as a number of you highlighted there, investor interest in this information is definitely a really key driver that we see globally. So here we're just highlighting the data from the Principles for Responsible Investment for the number of total PRI signatories. And we now see that we have over 5,000 signatories to the Principles for Responsible Investment, representing over 128 trillion US dollars in assets under management. So, of course, we've seen, in recent years, a really strong growth from where we were back in perhaps 2016, 2017, in the number of investors taking interest in these topics. And so what is it that's really driving this interest from investors? So I think what's important to highlight here is that a key driver behind this demand is the financial effect and relevance of this information. So here we're highlighting a study of retail investors, which was done by Morgan Stanley, where they found that the top driver, at least for individual investors, driving their interest in sustainable investing was the financial performance. So you can take a look at this study by following the link in the slide handout, but we'll take a look more closer now at what we mean by financial performance. So it's important to remember that today we're going to be talking about disclosing financially material sustainability information. And so we're going to discuss in more depth later in the workshop what we mean by material, But we wanted to be clear from the start what sorts of financial effects investors are looking to have more information on. So we'll start with effects on a company's performance. And this can often be seen in the statement of profit or loss, showing income, revenue, and expenditure. So sustainability related risks and opportunities can have a financial effect by changing the revenue mix or total revenue of a company. For example, if perhaps demand for its products and services change, or maybe its production capacity could be disrupted as a result of sustainability issues. And so we can also see as well changes in expenditure. For example, if there are increased operating costs due to rising energy prices, or the need to invest more in R&D to capitalize on sustainability related opportunities. And so you'll also hear us talking today about effects on a company's financial position. And so looking here at what that means, we often see a company's financial position on its balance sheet. And a company might experience changes in its assets or liabilities due to climate change issues. And we could also see changes to portfolio value, or possibly even write-offs of certain assets that could be damaged or repriced due to sustainability risks. And another financial effect that should be documented is changing financing and costs of capital. So this could both be increased costs of capital, for example, rising insurance premiums, but it could also be making use of new financial structures to access financing, such as green bonds or social bonds. And another few key concepts we wanted to highlight before we move into the next unit in the module is around sustainability related risks and opportunities. And so, as you can see here from the latest global risk survey from the World Economic Forum, we have a difference between those risk types that perhaps are most material over a short-term horizon as compared to a longer-term horizon. And so, what's important to remember with sustainability disclosures is that we're preparing for those risks that we might expect to arrive 5 or 10 years from now. And actually, the investments or changes in practice we might need to make today to either mitigate risks or capitalize on opportunity could lead to the financial effects occurring much earlier. So that's something to keep in mind during our training today. And another important aspect of sustainability risks and opportunities is how interconnected these topics are. So we've got another visual here from the same WEF report, which just shows the different kind of risk categories that we have and how many different connections and areas of influence there are between this. So all this is really to say that sustainability risks and opportunities are inherently connected. So although when we're reporting under the IFRS standards, we might have separate standards of S1 and S2 for general sustainability issues and climate, of course we know in practice these issues are very interconnected. So when we're preparing our disclosures and we're implementing our practices internally, we need to do our best to think holistically about that interconnection. Okay, so that was just a few things to get us started on the purpose front. I'm going to hand over to Lois now for our next segment of this module.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello, everybody. Well, we've looked with Fiona at why sustainability reporting is important. So now we're going to look at how sustainability-related financial disclosure standards have evolved in the landscape of sustainability reporting. Before we do that, though, can we ask you to participate in another Zoom poll that asks about which frameworks you are currently using for your sustainability reporting? You can select all that apply. Are you reporting to CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project? Are you using the Global Reporting Initiative standards, the Integrated Reporting Framework, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board's standards and guidance, the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, UN Global Compact Principles, or something else? And if there is something else that you're using, please do tell us in the chat. Just give you a few more minutes to participate. Oh, there's somebody already using IFRS standards. That's good to hear. It's very strong pattern has emerged, so we'll end the poll here. I'll share the results with you, and you can see that the majority of participants today are using the Global Reporting Initiative standards for their sustainability disclosure. Helps us to know that. Thank you. Also, some people using integrated reporting and ISSB standards, and far fewer using CDP, TCFD, and the United Nations Global Compact principles. Thank you for sharing that, though. It's good to know what you're doing at the moment. Let's have a look then at what the IFRS Foundation is and how the International Sustainability Standards Board came to be. Well, the IFRS Foundation is a not-for-profit public interest organisation that was established to develop high-quality, understandable, enforceable and globally accepted accounting and sustainability disclosure standards. So the IFRS Foundation hosts 2 independent standard-setting boards. In the dark blue box at the bottom, we can see the International Accounting Standards Board. This was formed in 2001. It sets financial reporting standards, and they are in place in over 140 jurisdictions around the world. The sister organisation, the ISSB, was in the light blue box, was formed in 2021 and released its first 2 standards that we're going to be talking about today in 2023, following strong market demand for these standards. The 2 boards work very closely together to ensure their standards complement each other. The governance of these standard-setting boards is provided by trustees, and they are in turn accountable to a monitoring board of public authorities. So how did this come to be? Well, you might recognise some of the logos on this screen, and perhaps it looks like a rather confused picture to you. But actually, the main message I want you to take from this slide is it's actually a slide about harmonisation and simplification. And most of the organisations represented by the logos on this screen have developed sustainability reporting standards and guidance over the years to support investor information needs. Apart from the Global Reporting Initiative, the information serves a wide stakeholder base. So you'll notice that there are arrows pointing to the IFRS Foundation. And this is to indicate that many of the work of these organisations have been adopted into the IFRS Foundation. So in particular, the work of the Transition Plan Task Force, insofar as it relates to disclosure, is now hosted within the IFRS Foundation. Similarly, the work of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures has been taken over by the IFRS Foundation, and 3 organisations that you see at the bottom of the screen, their work has been consolidated into the IFRS Foundation. CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, has aligned its climate questionnaire with IFRS S2, which is the climate disclosure standard issued by the ISSB, and the ISSB and GRI are committed to working closely together to jointly identify and align their common disclosures. So you can see that this is a picture of increasing harmonisation and simplification. I know not many of you are using TCFD, but we've just heard that the TCFD's work has been incorporated into the ISSB standards. So have a think about this question. Companies who disclose using the TCFD recommendations automatically comply with the ISSB standards. Is this true or is this false? You can only select one. You just a minute or so to think about this one. Thank you to those answering in the chat as well. Let's have a look then. Let's have a look at the answers. Let's end the poll, share the results. You can see that most of you said it was true. Some of you said it was false. I can see we've got some true answers in the chat as well. The answer actually is false. I can understand completely why you've answered true, because we've just told you that the work of the TCFD has been incorporated into the ISSB standards. And if you do use the TCFD recommendations, you will be a long way towards complying with the ISSB standards. But you cannot assume that you automatically comply with the ISSB standards if you're already using TCFD. And I'm going to explain why next. This is just really also to encourage you to read the ISSB standards. Well, on the left-hand side of the screen there in the little thumbnail, you'll see that a report was done to compare the ISSB's climate-related disclosure standards with the TCFD recommendations. And 3 types of differences were found. Differences in wording, different words used to capture the same type of information. Sometimes more detailed information required, such as if carbon credits are to be used for satisfying targets, what are those carbon credits? And thirdly, S2 requires some additional information sometimes. So this could be about further information about your resilience, for example, how the company has established that it is resilient to climate risks. But the architecture of the recommendations and the standards are the same, and in many respects they are very, very similar. So let's talk now about the ISSB's objective. The ISSB is focused on developing standards they call a global baseline that provides a common language for sustainability information. And this common language enables comparable and consistent sustainability disclosure across global capital markets. However, in addition to the global baseline set in the standards, the IFRS Foundation realizes that some jurisdictions will want to ask information in addition to the global baseline or to serve broader multi-stakeholder needs. And we're calling those here building blocks, those additional building blocks on top of the global baseline. And this is perfectly allowed, it's permitted by the standards, as long as the additional information is presented in such a way that it does not obscure the disclosures required by the global baseline. So you have the baseline in the ISSB standards and the building blocks that cover disclosures beyond the remit of the ISSB standards for jurisdiction-specific information and perhaps for information to meet broader stakeholder needs beyond the information needs of investors. So there has been global backing for this global standard that is represented by the ISSB standards IFRS S1 and S2. IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, announced its endorsement of the ISSB standards and encourages its 130 members to incorporate ISSB standards into their regulatory frameworks. The International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board has issued an assurance standard on sustainability reporting. As part of its regulatory implementation program, the IFRS Foundation is working with multiple jurisdictions around the world who are planning to introduce the ISSB standards on a voluntary or mandatory basis. And there's work going on to support market participants around the world who are planning to support voluntary disclosures against the new standards from 2024. So we're going to go over to our colleague Robert now, who's going to start explaining the standards to us.
Yes. Thank you, Lois, and hello to everyone from me. Yes, indeed. We'll be now moving to the next section of this module, and I'll give you an overview of the IFRS S1 and S2. So far we talked about the business case and market case for sustainability reporting, the evolution of the landscape, and how it's being simplified and rationalized. And I hope that's getting clear for you. And now we'll be talking about the standards themselves. Before we get into this, let's start with some important terms that should be understood. You can find definitions in your handout, but I want to briefly mention them here as well. So first of all, we'll be saying the phrase sustainability-related financial information quite a lot, and this can refer to a broad set of issues, including climate, nature, biodiversity, human, social, and others. So sustainability-related financial information is information about companies' sustainability-related risks and opportunities that is useful to investors in making decisions about providing resources to company. So that's about financial information. And then sustainability-related risks and opportunities are those that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital. It could affect the company's prospects. So then further, we will often also refer to general purpose financial reports, which includes a company's financial statements and management commentary. You might know this as management report, management review, or strategic report. Some regulators require specific disclosure in certain parts of general purpose financial reports. So we use this generic phrase throughout. Okay, and the next one would be some very important terms and 4 core pillars. And this, anyone familiar with TCFD will recognize them as core pillars or content areas for, and they also work for the ISSB standards. And these are governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. So for each core content area, there are a set of key disclosures to be addressed, and the standards provide very detailed guidance on these requirements. We will discuss each of 4 content areas today, but I encourage you to download the standards as a part of your homework assignment. Right, and let's move to the standards themselves. And then we'll first talk about IFRS S1 and its general requirements. To all preparers listening, let me start by saying don't be afraid. There's a lot to understand, but you might be surprised that some of the detail you're already familiar with. So, and to all the accountants listening, you'll also be relieved that there's many conceptual foundation terms and definitions developed by IASB, so the accounting standards body, in the ISSB standards as well. So there is an overlap between the two in that regard. So IFRS S1 is called General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability-Related Financial Information. It sets out general requirements for the content and presentation of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And again, if you know TCFD, you also see the same architecture applied throughout the standards. So S1 asks preparers to refer and consider the applicability of the SASB standards and other sources of further guidance to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities and identify material information. So the SASB standards are organized by industry, enabling a company to identify disclosure topics and metrics applicable to a company's business model and operations. And finally, the standards can be used in conjunction with any accounting requirements. So that's just a short overview of what is included in IFRS S1. And now we're moving to the S2, so the climate-related disclosures. So the scope of S1, again, is all sustainability topics except for climate, which is covered in S2. So, and the S2 is building on the same foundation as S1. So, for example, again, it fully incorporates the recommendation of TCFD. It sets out the requirements for a company to disclose material information about climate-related risks and opportunities. And it requires the disclosure of both cross-industry and industry-specific information. In terms of climate-related risks, these include both physical and transition risk, which we'll come back to them later. Other specific climate-related disclosures are required, for example, on scenario analysis and greenhouse gas emissions. Preparers must also refer and consider the applicability of industry-based guidance when implementing IFRS S2. As we said already, this is organized by industry, enabling company to identify climate-related disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. Now, let's then talk briefly about the relationship between the S1 and S2. So the both standards, S1 and S2, are not standalone standards. They're a package and must be applied together. Even when the company is reporting only on climate-related risks and opportunities, the company must apply both IFRS S1 and S2. This is because S1 sets general requirements or parameters for the type of information that needs to be provided in order to be decision useful for investors. And IFRS S1 also explains the concept of materiality and how companies identify material sustainability-related financial information. So important notion here. And now be moving to some conceptual foundation that underpin the ISSB standards, which might be new to anyone without accounting background. This concept helps us to understand how best to disclose information in order to meet the requirements of ISSB standards. So to start with, the companies must fully present a complete set of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Fair presentation also requires disclosures to be faithfully represented. And to achieve this, companies shall provide a complete, neutral, and accurate depiction of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. The reporting entity concept requires the organizational boundary for sustainability-related risks, financial disclosures, and financial statement to be the same. Another important concept is connected information. We saw earlier when Fiona explained how different risks are often interconnected. The ISSB standards require companies to clearly identify key connections, such as those between risks and opportunities, connections between the 4 content areas, and the connections between sustainability-related financial disclosures and main financial statements. And the importance of it will also be highlighted now by Lois, who will have an example regarding connected information.
Thank you, Robert. And just before we dive into the example, just to repeat the disclaimer that Fiona gave at the beginning of the presentation, the examples that we show you are really for inspiration and illustration. They are not to be regarded as best practice. Some of them were actually prepared before companies started applying the ISSB standards, but we think they illustrate the points we're making well. So Robert was just talking about connected information, and this is an example from BHP's 2024 annual report from the Operating and Financial Review section, which demonstrates their disclosures about the types of things they connect. BHP is a global mining company. And in the first paragraph, they tell us that climate risks and assessments and climate scenario analyses are integrated into the company's business strategy and treated as a sensitivity in their capital allocation process. So we can see those things being connected: climate risk, climate scenario analysis, and company strategy and capital allocation processes. And they also make connections and alignment between the company's capital allocation plans and the rapidly decarbonising global economy. In the second paragraph, they tell us that some of their assessments are still in progress. Companies undertaking studies to assess the effect of future physical climate-related risks on the company's operations, productivities and costs. And the results of that assessment are going to be used to inform and therefore connect with their risk profile, corporate planning, controls and adaptation measures. So they're using these physical climate risk assessments to connect even with things like the risk profile and corporate planning. The light grey text at the bottom of the slide shows us where further connections to further information on the impacts of climate-related risks can be found, including how they affect operational activities, greenhouse gas emissions across the value chain, financial statements and production, revenue and expenditure. And this is just one example from BHP's report about how the effects of climate change are connected with wider business decisions and plans about operations, risks, controls, and finance. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you, Lois. All right, and to check your understanding of the things we are just covering and talking about related to connected information, we have a poll which is now opened. The question is, what information should be considered for connected information? And we have three options to choose from. Please select all that apply. And should that be governance, strategy, and risk management, and metrics and targets? Is that should be the connection between those elements? B, sustainability-related financial disclosures and financial statements, and C, sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And see the answers coming in. Looks like there is a there's a right balance or proportion, which suggests that you are answering this question correct. Yeah, I'll end the poll at the moment. The answer is all are correct. So you should endeavor to have connectivity between all of these categories in order to meet the conceptual foundation requirement of connected information. So well done to all of you who answered that way. All right, and now moving to the next part and the next important topic and term, materiality. So the standards are built on the concept of materiality as defined by the IFRS Foundation. We're going to go into this in more detail later, but just to highlight at the moment that we will be referring today to material information, which is information that is omitted, misstated, or obscured, could reasonably be expected to affect investor decision making. So during the ISSB consultation on the exposure drafts, one of the key feedback topics was the importance of supporting preparers, particularly those with more limited resources and those in emerging markets. So in addition to the standards and application guidance published in 2023, a number of educational resources were also published, and since then others have followed, including the IFRS Knowledge Hub. We are also in the process of gathering examples and case studies provided by our partners. The ISSB standards were aligned with IFRS S2 to help preparers seeking industry-based guidance, and the FSA credential was also updated with more planned to come. So I should also note the IFRS Foundation Capacity Building Program launch and COP27 is a key part of support for preparers, and the ISSC training initiative is one of our most important deliverables. Okay, so this was about the how we supporting the application and how we supporting preparers. Now we have another poll. And the question here is a bit specific, but important. So let's assume water is a vital input to your business, but ISSB standards do not currently have a specific standard on water. So what do you do? Yeah, should you not disclose and do anything about water? B, consult the source of guidance listed by ISSB, engage a consultancy to help, or copy your competitors' reporting. And I hope that it's fairly should be clear to you what is the best approach in such a case. See the answers coming in and it's looking good. Yes, you are right. The best approach in this case will be consulting the source of guidance listed by ISSB. which then includes the topics which are not currently have not specific. There's no specific standard regarding them in the ISSB standards. So yes, you should consult the sources of guidance. Engaging consultancy, that might be also a good idea. So that's something you should consider as well. Doing nothing is not a good approach. Copying your competitor reporting it's also not the right approach. Although of course you might want to refer as a benchmark to how it's being done by your competitors, but should not be a copying exercise. All right, we're now going to be handing over to Fiona, which will provide the summary of Module 1.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Robert. And as he says, that brings us to the end of our first module. So before we wrap up, we're just going to take a few minutes to recap on what we've covered so far. So firstly, we reviewed the purpose of sustainability-related disclosures. And a key takeaway I hope that you'll leave this workshop with is that there are important benefits, both internally and externally, for collecting and disclosing sustainability-related financial information. So if you're not aiming to make good use of the data you're collecting to improve your strategic decision making, you're going about this all wrong. And you're wasting your time, fundamentally. So if you have disclosures in difficult to abate or high impact sectors, your competitors could disclose these risks and opportunities, leaving your investors wondering why you might be lagging, and that ultimately could start to affect your ability to raise capital. And next, we looked at the evolution of disclosure standards and the formation of the ISSB and the aim to simplify the reporting landscape. And when you're thinking about other voluntary disclosures, you shouldn't see them as competing with the ISSB standards, but rather building on top of them. And finally, we introduce the standards and important concepts you need to understand in order to use them correctly. And a key point I want to reiterate here is that these standards and the guidance that come with them are designed to meet the needs of investors, and therefore they are heavily focused on the prospects that we discussed at the very start of this unit around financial performance, financial effects, and risk, etc. Okay, so to bring things to a close, we've got a quick exercise to wrap up the module and to get you thinking about this topic a little further. And we should say as well that each of these exercises that we'll do together today correspond to the content in the disclosure plan homework exercise as well. So we can use the exercises today to start your thinking for that disclosure plan. So our first question for you is really thinking how you're going to define the objectives for your sustainability disclosures. So we've talked in this module so far about, the purpose of reporting and perhaps the drivers that you might have for doing it. So what we think is really important at outset in this disclosure plan is that you're clear on the goals that you're setting for yourself. So this is around being clear what you're trying to achieve through your sustainability disclosure, what requirements in terms of reporting frameworks or, of course, the IFRS standards or regulatory needs you might be seeking to address, and where you are now in relation to those requirements, what might be missing to enable you to achieve those goals. So this is also where you might want to think about what your investors or other stakeholders have given you in terms of feedback on your existing reporting, and also aiming to look to the future as well. So thinking about future reporting requirements as well as current ones, and also how you can really maximize those internal benefits of reporting at outset that we've discussed already. So I see a couple of you have already found the question in Menti, so you can access that using the link that I've shared in the chat again, which is the same as before. And I'll just share the screen now with Menti so that we can see the other options for how you can join and also look at the responses coming through together. So no worries if your thoughts on this are maybe at quite an early stage. Just a really quick initial reflection is fine, of course, if that's where you're at today. But yeah, just let us know, what's front of mind for you in terms of what you're aiming to achieve with your sustainability reporting here, and what should that objective be? So I see the first couple of responses we've had through. So someone's shared that they want to have the ability to construct an understanding to pitch for the company and be able to illustrate well-structured format to approach IFRS S1 and S2. So that sounds like a nice, clear focus that you have there in your approach. And someone says, after a long review and read, to be able to decide what's the best approach. Okay, so maybe I think you're suggesting maybe needing a little bit more time to think about that, which of course is very natural. So we don't have to have all of our answers ready today, but any initial ideas are also helpful for you to take away and think through further with your colleagues. So I see someone's mentioned understanding IFRS, connecting it to financials, connecting between financials and sustainability and climate. Indeed, that's a really key thing, obviously, that underpins these IFRS standards, as we've heard. The connection between the ISSB standards and the IASB accounting standards is really important. So thinking at outset about how you can think about that interconnection is a great starting point. And then I see someone's mentioned in the chat all of these areas. Well, of course, exactly. I think in practice, we know that there's more than one objective to meet here. So you might have more than one, or you might have a top priority. So that's fine as well. And someone has mentioned around meeting the regulatory requirements in the banking sector. Of course, so if you have the regulations for your sector in particular and in your jurisdiction, of course, that's a really important way to focus what you're doing. And then I see a few more responses coming through now. So someone's mentioned around being legally accepted to be listed on the stock exchange, of course. Yes, so as we've heard, ASE are working closely on this topic, as are other stock exchanges. So increasingly, they're taking steps to align their listing requirements with the S1 and S2 standards as well. So another key driver there. I see someone's mentioned around enhancing transparency, building trust with stakeholders, accountability, and demonstrating integration of sustainability, I guess, within your business strategy and governance. So, yeah, I think that's a really comprehensive approach there. That fundamental transparency and accountability point, of course, is inherent here. I see someone's mentioning GRI standards as well. Yes, of course, I know, as we saw at the start, many of you are using GRI too. So continuing to look at that alongside the ISSB is important. We do have some content we'll cover later in the session, actually, about the interoperability and mapping between the different standards as well. Someone's mentioning about risk management. Of course, we talked already about those sustainability risks and opportunities over the long term. So having that clear emphasis on how to manage those issues and build your resilience is a great objective to have from this. Best practice and integrating frameworks to connect information. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, everyone. And then I see Randa's also shared a few thoughts in the chat as well about to evaluate and select different disclosures, the most appropriate approach, ensuring alignment with organizational goals. Yeah, exactly. So maybe your goal at this point is just to make sure that you have taken the time to do that assessment and evaluate it in a careful manner. So I think it's good to be intentional about that. And so having that emphasis already on making sure to do that assessment thoroughly is a really good thinking, and just getting that clear with your stakeholders internally at outset, I think, is important. And integrating into mainstream and financial analysis you mentioned as well. So sharing the example of disclosing the climate transition plan, of course, to improve access to capital and improve your eligibility for green bonds. Exactly. So I think increasingly, as we're talking about transition plan a little bit later in the session, exactly that, it's not just about, implementing goals and targets to reduce emissions, but actually fundamentally providing opportunities for your business to finance its transition to more sustainable pathways. Okay, excellent. Just scroll and see we have a couple more responses there as well. Following up with a consultant during the implementation. Yeah, so maybe, that's a good starting point and goal, is to identify the resources that you need and maybe the right advisor to guide you through this process. And of course, defining your internal actions towards net zero. Yes, exactly. So using these disclosure standards, not just to put externally facing information out, but also to develop internal strategies and processes which can support you in achieving your ESG goals, enhancing ESG. Okay, brilliant. I think we'll close that there, but thank you everyone who's shared your thoughts with us. That's been super helpful, and I think a helpful reflection for everyone else in the session to see what your thinking is. So would encourage those who've maybe been a little shy so far to please take part, and feel free to type whatever comes to mind for you in as many or as few words as possible. But it's always really useful just to get a sense of what others are thinking. So thank you for sharing, for those of you who've been able to. Okay, brilliant. So I think that brings us now back to Robert for the next segment. So I'll just take us back into the presentation while I hand over to you. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Hannah. All right, now we're then moving to the next module, talking about alignment and setting the direction. So this is the slide we're looking for. So we have now introduced initial concepts. Let's dive into how to apply the ISSB standards, taking into account additional disclosures, including any relevant geographical sectoral requirements, as well as peer practices and your leadership objectives. So the breakdown of the unit. So in order to understand how to ensure your disclosures, how your disclosures meet global standards, we'll look at two concepts in this unit. The first, the main focus will be on how to apply the standards to achieve global baseline for disclosures. And once we cover that, we will also discuss how additional disclosures fit into. So let's then begin focus first on how to apply the ISSB standards as the global baseline. So the core content, we'll start with the first core content area, governance. These include aspects that relate to the governance body in your company and how management is applied. So the number of questions which should be asked here, we will discuss these questions, and those questions should be asked in the company to start identifying the information that will support some of disclosure requirements, for example, as a part of gap analysis. So we look at the governance and management requirements. We can see that there are several that are very the number of questions which are qualitative, and for example, those questions could be: which bodies are responsible for the oversight and management of processes, controls, and procedures of sustainability-related risks and opportunities? For example, is management responsibility delegated to a specific role or committee? How and when do they get informed about sustainability-related risks and opportunities? How these issues inform strategy, decision-making, and risk management? This could include setting targets to manage sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And then another question will be whether the progress against these targets is linked to executive remuneration. So for more information, you can make use of the SSE checklist tool, but remember, it's not a replacement for reading and using the full ISSB standards. And now we will take a look at a couple of examples to see what does it mean in practice. Again, Lois will present you those examples.
Thank you, Robert. So the first example we're going to look at that illustrates the way in which companies disclose their governance arrangements is from a company called Yara, which is a global crop nutrition company, 17,000 employees, and they operate in 60 countries. In this example, we can see that Yara has a highly integrated governance model where responsibilities for sustainability are embedded across a number of business functions, including risk management, health, safety, environment and quality, human resources, and global climate and energy. The sustainability governance team that we see in the light green box in the middle of the slide, they have a direct reporting line to the Chief Financial Officer. And we can see that their responsibilities are to look after sustainability performance and reporting. You can see lots of arrows on the slide as well, and they indicate things like the flow of information and input between the different governance bodies in the organization, and they indicate which bodies have responsibility for and oversight of and reporting lines to other bodies within the governance model. So there are multiple governance models companies can choose from. There is no particular model to use. So it's important to find the governance structure that's fit for purpose and for your company's own needs. So let's look at another example now of how a company makes disclosures about governance. And this is from Toyota, which I'm sure you all know is a car manufacturer, including a manufacturer of hybrid electric vehicles. This is an extract from Toyota's 2024 annual report, and it explains the role of the Sustainability Committee within the wider corporate governance structure. So the Sustainability Committee is one of the business execution committees that reports direct to the President and Board of Directors. So amongst other things, this extract tells us the frequency with which the Sustainability Committee meets, who the chairperson is. This is the executive in charge of enterprise risk and compliance management. So different to the Yara example where the CFO chaired the Sustainability Committee. The report shows us also who the members of the committee are, and you can see that they come from a number of different functions, including accounting, environment, technical executives, audit and supervisory board members, and external experts. So a cross-functional committee in terms of its makeup. And the issues that are identified by the Sustainability Committee as being important are reported and deliberated on by the Board of Directors, and each division and group company incorporates the resulting decisions into their specific activities. And you can also see the agenda and actions of the Sustainability Committee in the last row there under main agenda. So they approve action plans on sustainability and targets, and they evaluate activity results. They determine the direction of the approach to sustainability that captures the opinions of stakeholders and social trends. So they're obviously doing some engagement work too. And they revise the sustainability policy, which you could find a direct link to in the annual report because it's linked by a QR code. So that was governance, and we're going to hand over to Fiona now to take us through the next core content area.
Great, thank you, Lois. So hopefully with those examples helping to make governance quite clear, we'll look now at the next core content area, which is strategy. So strategy does have quite a few more disclosures to include than governance, but it's also really where companies can see the benefits from sustainability-related opportunities and also being better prepared for the risks. So as you can see here, there are 3 high-level areas we're going to focus on in the strategy content area. And so those are risks and opportunities, effects, and resilience. And we'll review each of these separately. So IFRS S1 and S2 disclosure requirements on strategy are designed to enable users of general purpose financial reports to understand a company's strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So if we first look at these requirements relating to sustainability-related risks and opportunities, here are some of the questions you're going to want to be asking internally. So when disclosing information about risks, information required can include a description of the effects, the time horizons under which those effects are expected, and keeping in mind, as we talked about earlier, that those financial effects could occur before the risk or opportunity materializes and or after, and can change over time. And the last 2 questions on this list in particular look at climate. So this aligns with the requirements from S2. So for example, investors also want to understand what types of risks and opportunities have been identified. And this is often where we see companies using the categories that have been developed through the TCFD of physical and transition risk, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail later. And both standards, S1 and S2, include guidance to support companies in identifying and disclosing risks and opportunities. And they also recommend utilising wider industry-based guidance, such as the ISSB standards. And again, we know an example probably is helpful here to illustrate a bit more clearly what we mean. So we'll talk about a couple of different examples throughout this segment. We should say with examples, probably the more in-depth we get into the content, the more we know that the text can be quite small. So we'd encourage you to have a little bit of a sense of an overview from what we present now, but to have a look in the slide handout and follow the links to look at the actual company reports so that you can read these in more detail in your own time. So the example we're showing you here is from Mondi Group's integrated report. They are a multinational packaging and paper group operating across Europe, North America, and Africa. And in the left-hand extract here, we see the risks that they've identified, how these risks align with 4 key categories across strategy, finance, operational, and compliance, and the different delegated risk owners that they've assigned for those risks as well. And then on the right-hand side, we see analysis of the climate change risks that sit in the strategic category. And they've categorized here that physical and transition risk type that we show about. So we'll go into a bit more detail about some of these concepts later, but here fundamentally we're seeing an example of how they've gone from identifying those broader business risks and then thinking more specifically about climate and sustainability risks as well, but also keeping those two things connected. And we won't talk in detail about this for Mondi, but it's worth noting as well, if you want to look at this example afterwards, that they have actually put timeframes and quantified financial effects against these risks as well. Which brings us on, as I said, to another aspect of the risks and opportunities that you'll need to be thinking about, which is disclosing time horizons. So you might remember we talked earlier that time is sometimes quite a different factor when we're talking about sustainability related disclosures. So let's make sure that we're clear on what we mean by time horizons. So the ISSB standards ask you to identify within what time horizon any material effects are expected to occur. And the definitions for short, medium, and long-term time horizon can vary between companies, and they'll depend on a number of factors. So, for example, it could depend on your investment and business cycles, the strategic planning horizons of your organization, perhaps the lifespan of your assets, or other factors such as the assessment periods your investors are using. So what's important to remember here is that the time horizon should be defined. So your investors won't necessarily know what you mean in your disclosures by short and medium term, unless you've provided them with a quantitative definition for that suits the purposes of your company and considers those factors that we've talked about there. And so moving on now to the second group of disclosures in the strategy category. The first section there was about identifying those risks and opportunities. And the next set of disclosures is around exactly what the effect is of those risks and where it could occur in the business. So to start tackling the disclosure requirements of the standards, companies might want to start asking themselves questions such as describing these effects, understanding their responses planned for mitigating or adapting to the effects. And also, again, we know an example will help here, so let's have another look at a company's approach to this. So here we have an example from the global chemical producer BASF in their 2024 annual report. It illustrates some of the ways that projects that form part of their company's sustainability strategy really sit across their value chain, and kind of shows how those strategic sustainability risks and opportunities they've identified will have effects on different areas of their value chain. And so in their strategy, they talk about supplying customers with products that contribute to sustainability through the use or reduce of their carbon footprint. So that shows where they've identified a potential opportunity there. And the company is prioritizing where they see rising demand from customers, where there's a willingness perhaps to pay for more sustainable products, as well as transformation projects that will support their license to operate. You can also see as well that they're investing in renewable energy to optimize their plants. And they talk really as well about how they can align their company's portfolio and support their global carbon targets across their operations. And in the commentary that sits alongside this, this is just a small summary, as I say, from the report. They also talk around the sales revenue that they want to achieve from sustainable products by 2030. So targeting 10 billion euros in revenue from sustainable sources, which is really evidencing that potential impact on financial performance that they expect to see from this sustainability opportunity they've identified. So overall, I think it's a good example of connecting between the company's strategy, its targets, its ambitions, and putting financial estimates against those as well. So we started to talk a little bit there about how you might quantify figures within these risks and opportunity effect disclosures. And of course, we know that one of the obstacles that companies can face when reporting these effects is the level of detail that they are able to disclose. And so that example there was mostly qualitative, but what about quantitative information? So a company is asked to disclose both quantitative and qualitative information about current and anticipated financial effects from risks and opportunities. However, the S1 and S2 standards also set out criteria for when only qualitative information is required. So using only qualitative information is permitted if a company can't separate the effects of a climate-related risk or opportunity from other business effects, if there's a high level of measurement uncertainty, and also if the company doesn't yet have the skills, capabilities, or resources to provide that quantitative information. So now we come on to the last part of the strategy component. So the first part there was looking at the risks and opportunities that will affect the company. The second part at what those effects are. And now this group of disclosures is looking particularly at how a company is preparing for uncertainties and ensuring its resilience into the future. So this really gets into the practices and processes that a company has in place to assess its own resilience and to make strategic adjustments where needed. So disclosures include information on the types of assessment that have been used and how scenario analysis has been employed. So at the heart of it, resilience disclosures are asking the company to assess their resilience to climate risks and opportunities over long-term time horizons, and to think about the inputs and key assumptions that they have used and provide transparency over those. So we're going to dive deeper into the scenario analysis aspect in a moment. But again, some of the questions that you can consider asking internally when starting to disclose this information are really focusing on, what is the company's capacity to react or adjust to the uncertainties arising? And how could climate scenarios be used to test this resilience? So again, we'll have a look at an example or two to help us with this. So our first example is from Stora Enso, which is a Finnish and Swedish forest products company. And they show us in this little diagram here what they expect their sales revenues to look like in 2030 from different parts of their business. So they distinguish between the kind of essential businesses, which are more the business as usual activities they do today around forests, pulp and paper products, but their strategic growth areas as well. So this is around sustainable buildings, more renewable packaging and biomaterials. And here you'll see that actually they're projecting that by 2030, up to 80% of their sales revenue would come from these more strategic growth areas. So we have an immediate picture here of how they're seeing, their transition to these more sustainable products and the long-term goals they're setting for themselves to move in that direction. So I think this is helpful to show how they're thinking long-term about how they capitalize on those issues and make investments and strategic decisions today to inform that growth pathway. And the second example we have here is from Solvay, which is a Belgian chemicals company. And this example we're using to illustrate how they've reported on the financial effects of their climate risks and opportunities. And in particular, I want to highlight how they're transparent about the estimates they use and provide notes to explain how they've developed their scenario analysis. So if you're using tools like scenario analysis, investors do need to understand how you've used them. So you can see in this excerpt that they say the assumptions they've used, so which scenarios they've selected, which business units they've focused on, and they also highlight that internal experts have worked together with the consultant to conduct the assessment. And then in the second aspect of the disclosure that we see at the bottom of the screen in the table, they've reported as well on the financial impact drivers for the different risks and opportunities. So they've used a qualitative scoring scale from a -3 for a negative impact to a +3 to indicate the potential direction and magnitude of the financial effect they're expecting for their different climate transition risks. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a walkthrough in that section. And I now have a quick poll question just to test one of the concepts that we talked about earlier and just to get a sense of what your understanding was from that. So the question for you is to let us know in which cases can a company choose to disclose only qualitative information or a combination of quantitative information about current and anticipated financial effects. So you can select more than one answer here if you think there's more than one correct option. So I'll just give you guys a moment to let us know which of these you think could be valid reasons for disclosing qualitative information or maybe a combination of qualitative and quantitative. Okay. I know these questions sometimes take a little bit of thinking through, so I'll give us a few more seconds, but hopefully as many of you will be able to take part as possible. We do always love to see your engagement in the session, so you give us a smile on our face if you take part in the poll. I'll say that much if that's another incentive to answer the questions. Okay, maybe that helped. We're up to about a third of people. I'll give maybe 5 more seconds and then we'll share the results. Okay, just about 50 of us have taken part, so I think we'll share the poll results with you there. And indeed, for those of you that answered, most of you have got this question correct, in that the top 2 reasons are indeed valid reasons for opting to disclose all or partially qualitative information. So either if you can't separate those effects of a climate risk from other types of effects, or if you have too high a level of measurement uncertainty to provide that disclosure. And then on the final point around information that sheds a negative light on the company, indeed, that isn't a correct option because, of course, companies are asked to provide transparency about any potential material risk or opportunity. So if you do have information that would indicate a negative financial impact, it's important, of course, to disclose that transparently to your investors. And we did see that in that Solvay example, and I think in the Monday earlier example as well, where they were indicating both positive opportunities, but also potential negative financial impacts from risks as well. So good to see that companies are adopting that approach. Okay, that's great. So that brings us over to Lois now, who'll take us into some climate-specific considerations for this section.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, well, as the governance provisions that we discussed earlier are very similar between IFRS S1 and S2. There are no main differences. But when we get to the content requirements on strategy, there are some differences between S1 general requirements and S2 on climate. So we're going to look at those. Now, the title says from TCFD to ISSB, but I know many of you are not using TCFD. So please just regard this bullet point list as a set of considerations for you as you approach climate reporting under IFRS S2. So as far as strategy is concerned, S2 requires a company to refer to and consider the applicability of industry-based disclosure topics. Now, these can be found in the IFRS S2 industry-based guidance on identifying climate-related risks and opportunities. And that document is available on the ISSB website, and it's based on Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards. So the type of requirement you'll find in there, or the type of disclosure objective is, if, for example, your company develops personal products, for the sector-specific nature of information you might want to provide on that, it will ask where you're sourcing palm oil, for example, or how whether you use palm oil. Secondly, on this list, S2 requires disclosure of information about where in the company's business model and value chain risks and opportunities are concentrated. So is there an asset where physical risks particularly affect the business? Thirdly, the S2 requires details on how the company is affected by climate-related risks and opportunities it identifies, including its response to those risks and opportunities or planned response, whether it has a transition plan, we'll talk about that more in a moment, and whether it's set any climate-related targets and how it plans to achieve them. In providing disclosures about the current and anticipated financial effects of risks and opportunities on the company's financial position, performance, and cash flows, as we discussed earlier, S2 sets out criteria for when quantitative and qualitative information is required. So the standard recognizes it can be very difficult to provide quantitative information. So it says that qualitative information only is permitted in some circumstances. For example, when a company cannot separately identify the effects of a risk or opportunity from wider risks and opportunities, or when the level of measurement uncertainty involved is too high. Then we get to the pre-penultimate point when disclosing about the anticipated financial effects of climate-related risks and opportunities. S2 requires a company to use all reasonable and supportable information available at the reporting date without undue cost and effort, and using an approach that is commensurate with the company's circumstances. This is what we might call an easement. It's designed to make the disclosure a bit more manageable, but we're going to talk about exactly what this means a bit later. The penultimate point is that S2 requires the use of climate-related scenario analysis when companies assess their business resilience to climate risk, but it does not specify the particular scenarios that must be used. That is for the company to determine using all reasonable and supportable information that is commensurate with its circumstances. And finally, S2 requires information about business resilience that is assessed using climate scenarios, including, are there any significant areas of uncertainty that were considered by the company in its assessment? What is the company's capacity to adjust and adapt its strategy and business model over time to keep resilient or enhance resilience? And of course, it requires details of when scenario analysis was carried out and by reference to which scenarios. Now, I mentioned that one of the responses to the effects of climate-related risk and opportunity on a company could be that it prepares a climate transition plan. And S2 requires a company to disclose details about a climate transition plan if it has one. So there's no requirement in the standard for a company to prepare a disclosure plan, a transition plan, but if it has one, it must provide details of them. So a transition plan is defined in S2 as an aspect of the company's overall strategy that includes targets, actions, or resources for the transition towards a lower carbon economy, including, for example, greenhouse gas emissions reductions plan. So let's talk a bit about what a transition plan needs to do. Well, first of all, because it's an aspect of the company's overall strategy, it should align internally with the company's strategy, including the business case and motivation for the strategy, and identify which decarbonisation levers are most economically and technologically feasible for the company in the context of its wider strategy. Secondly, the transition plan should be aligned with science, including what science says about requirements for net zero to be achieved and how carbon neutrality or Paris-aligned goals are explained in terms of the science. The plan should set long-term transition goals, and they should be supported by activities and targets to achieve those goals, as well as interim targets used to monitor progress towards the long-term goal. Of course, the transition is uncertain how it will manifest over time and between sectors. So the plan should be transparent about the dependencies for success and the dependencies on which the progress of the plan is dependent, what risks and challenges of implementing the plan might be faced, and how will residual or unabated greenhouse gas emissions be treated. Then the penultimate point is that, of course, the transition will proceed in different ways for different sectors, and therefore sector-specific pathways might be consulted to inform the development of the company's transition plan. And we're going to look at some resources that are available for that in a moment. And the final point is that there are a number of resources and reports in the public domain that set out the hallmarks for a credible transition plan. And these have often been developed by investor groups and similar. So companies should consider how their transition plan will be evaluated and give it the stated hallmarks of credibility. So I just mentioned that we'd look at some transition plan resources. Now, there are lots, really lots and lots. We can't show you them all here, but here is a selection. And in the triangle on the left-hand side, you can see at the bottom the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards that set out requirements for companies to disclose details of their transition plan if they have one. The resources that are offered by GFANZ, which is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and the Transition Plan Task Force, are designed to support companies with their disclosures and with making their plans. So these three types of resources are all mutually reinforcing. In the middle, you can see the some of the resources of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which includes sectoral pathways and expectations for real economy and financial institutions in relation to their transition plans. And we also see the transition pathway disclosure framework, which, as we said earlier, is now within the ISSB's work. So it was taken over by the ISSB. So these resources are available along with many others. Now, you'll be glad to hear, I'm sure, that we're now going to take a short break, just a 5-minute break. So please take the opportunity to have a stretch, have a drink, think of some questions you'd like to send us, pop them in the Q&A box. We'll play you some relaxing music and see you back in 5 minutes. everyone, welcome back. Hope you had a chance for a drink and a stretch and that you're ready to move on now to the next core content area on risk management and climate risk management. As you can see from this high-level description, this content area asks companies to disclose information about their processes for risk management and whether and how those processes are incorporated into the company's overall risk profile. So digging a bit deeper into this category, the sorts of questions you might want to ask yourself are covered on this slide. But just as a reminder, when we covered the strategy content area, that was the part of the content elements that ask companies to identify their risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect a company's prospects, I beg your pardon. But now we move on more to look at the processes and policies that are used to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities, and whether and how they're integrated into the overall risk management process. So you might want to ask questions internally here about the types of inputs and parameters that are used for risk management, whether and how sustainability related risks and opportunities are prioritized within those processes, what criteria are used to assess the risks, such as nature, likelihood, and magnitude of the risks and opportunities. What is the monitoring process for sustainability risks and opportunities, and whether and how those processes have changed over time. Now, all of that applies to climate change as well, but there are some climate-specific considerations about risk management when we look at IFRS S2, and we're going to look at those now. So the S2 requirements are broadly consistent with those of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. But when you're looking at IFRS S2, bear in mind that detailed information will be required about the input parameters used to identify risks, whether and how a climate scenario analysis was used to inform risk identification, as well as business resilience, and again, whether and how those processes have changed. And the same considerations apply to opportunities. In S2, we also have a definition of climate-related risks. So these definitions are taken from the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and they are found within the standard. The definition is found there. So there are two types of climate-related risks identified. The first, transition risks, arise from efforts to transition to a lower carbon economy, and they are often categorized as policy, legal, technological, market, and reputational risks. And we see some examples of these types of risks in the middle of the screen. They could be increased pricing of greenhouse gas emissions, enhanced reporting obligations, exposure to litigation, costs associated with the transition associated with lower emission technologies, changing customer behavior giving rise to risks, and uncertainty in market signals, and increased costs or availability of raw materials, and perhaps stigmatization of entire sectors. In addition to transition risks, the standard identifies physical risks, which can either be acute, and these arise from weather-related events such as storms, floods, droughts, or heat waves, which are increasing in severity and frequency, or chronic risks, which arise from longer-term shifts in climatic patterns, such as changes in rainfall and temperature, sea level rise, reduced water availability, biodiversity loss, and changes in soil productivity. And again, we see some examples in the middle at the bottom of the slide there. Now, in both cases, these risks can give rise to financial implications for a company, such as increased operating costs, asset impairment, perhaps regulatory costs associated with new regulation. Financial performance could also be affected by shifting consumer demands and the development and deployment of new technology. So those financial effects on cash flows, access to finance and cost of capital can manifest over different timeframes, the short, medium or long term. There's also a definition in the standard of climate-related opportunities, which are the potential positive effects arising from climate change for a company. So the types of opportunities include resource efficiency, changing to lower emission sources of energy, developing new products and services to respond to different consumer preferences or demands, finding access to new markets, enhancing the company's resilience by understanding and maximizing the opportunities. And again, we see some examples of these opportunities in the middle of the screen. So, and again, some of these opportunities are very sector specific and can give companies significant advantages. As with risks, though, these opportunities can have financial effects on the company's cash flows, access to finance and cost of capital, as well as effects on reputation, for example. And these different types of opportunities manifest again over different time horizons. Let's have a look at an example of risk disclosure from a company called the RS Group, which is a UK-based distributor of electrical and industrial equipment that also has global operations. The RS Group, and this example is from their 2024 report, but actually they've analysed their climate risks and opportunities for a number of years as part of their annual report disclosures. In the report, by way of general context, we see that they identify 10 principal risks, of which one is climate-related risk, including transitions and physical risks. What you see in this extract is focused on physical risks. So the most significant physical climate risks come from the impact of extreme heat on the company's distribution sites. And you can see that on the first row there, distribution sites, impact of extreme heat. On the second row, we see that the second most significant physical risk to the company is the potential for extreme weather events to impact the company in terms of its customer supply operations and physical damage to the assets and so on. So the little red wheel icons here show us that strategically risks affect particular types of particular parts of the business, including operational excellence. And we also see icons telling us which stakeholder groups are most affected by the risk. Further on toward it in the columns, we see in this extract the business owners of each risk are identified. The metrics they use to monitor each risk are identified. And also in the very final column, we see the actions the company is taking to mitigate each risk, including things like, because we're talking about physical risk here, building upgrades and capital investments to support those building upgrades, but also business continuity planning. So quite a lot of information in that example. We're going to hand over to Robert now to take us through the next core content area.
Great. Thank you, Lois. Yes, indeed, we'll be moving to the next core content area, metrics and targets. And we will talk about it in more details. So let's start with metrics. So requirements and metrics are designed to enable investors to understand a company's performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Preparers shall disclose information explaining how the metrics are defined, if they are absolute or relative, if they have been validated by a third party, as well as methodology. So, for example, what is the method of calculation? What are the inputs? What are the limitations? What assumptions are involved? So that was about the metrics and regarding the targets. Requirements and targets are designed to enable investors to understand the targets a company has set to monitor progress towards achieving its strategic goals. So disclosure would have to include whether they are qualitative or quantitative, and whether it is set voluntarily or by law or regulation. The metric used to set the target and to monitor progress towards its achievement, the baseline period from which progress is measured, and the period to which the target applies, and also what are the it should be disclosed what are the milestones and interim targets, and also if there have been any revision to the target, there should be explanation about those revisions. And to that topic on targets, we have another example. Over to you, Lois.
Yes, thanks, Robert. And this example comes from the sustainability report of a company called CLP, which is one of the largest investor-owned power businesses in Asia Pacific. And it's a company that aims to be a leading responsible power provider. This is an extract from their 2024 sustainability report, and it's an example about metrics on waste management and material use, which focuses on the percentage of pollution the company reduces through recycling and removal activities in line with its circular economy strategy principles. Now, the circular economy principles that the company strives to achieve are set out in the text at the top of the slide, and then we see the actual metrics at the bottom of the slide. So they are showing us the pollution reduction for waste products, recycling of rechargeable batteries and scrap material, etc. They show us the 2024 results, but also the extent to which it is in line with the progress that they expected and that they set when they set out their targets. We can see the target they're aiming for by the end of 2025 and by 2030. And actually on the waste products, you can see that they're slightly ahead of target, and they explain elsewhere in the report that that is because they've made a particular divestment. So the two other things to point out about this particular extract, as Robert said just now, the metrics requirements in the standards, the ISSB standards, ask a company to set out the methodology it's used for calculation, and you can see that the CLP refers to the ISSB reference and the GRI reference they've used for the calculation. The other thing to point out here is that lots of the examples we've shown you today are about climate change, because that is one of the more mature areas of disclosure. But here we have an example of disclosures on waste management, and bear in mind that the IFRS S1 requires a company to make disclosures on all sustainability related risks and opportunities, and to provide material information about them. So back to you now, Robert.
Great. Thank you, Lois. Yeah, I'll be moving to the next part. We'll be talking about some of the climate-specific consideration for disclosures on metrics and targets. And let's now go back to the topic of the transition between the TCFD to ISSB in the context of metrics. So the TCFD framework included recommended disclosure, which IFRS 2 builds on and adds to as a part of the required disclosures. And for example, IFRS still requires disclosure of industry-based metrics relevant to companies' business models and activities. Additional disclosure are required on greenhouse gas emissions, including separate disclosure for the consolidated accounting group and associated joint ventures, and information about the company's financed emissions. There is exposure draft regarding the finance emissions on the proposed reduction of the disclosure. I'll be posting a link to that exposure draft. So I'm sorry for this, a bit of a side message. In addition, IFRS S2 sets out Scope 3 measurement framework to provide guidance for preparing Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions disclosures, while IFRS S2 does not explicitly require a company to disaggregate its greenhouse gas emissions disclosures by constituent gases. IFRS S1 includes a requirement on the disaggregation that would result in disclosure of the constituent gases being required if such disaggregation provides material information. So I would try to also remind everyone that you can access more information on climate metrics in the SSE's training tool on this topic. We will share the link in the chat as well. You can find it also on the SSE's website. So from TCFD to ISSB standards. So likewise, there are some additional disclosures compared to TCFD for targets. So for example, IFRS S2 requires disclosure about how the latest international agreement on climate change has informed the target and whether the target has been validated by a third party. Another additional requirement in the IFRS S2 is that disclosure of more detailed information on greenhouse gas emission targets, including additional information about the any planned use of carbon credits to achieve the company's net house gas emission targets. And also, IFRS S2 includes additional requirements to disclose information about the approach to setting and reviewing each target, how the entity monitors progress against the target, including whether the target was derived using a sectoral decarbonization approach. And the next thing will be, again, talking about specific metrics regarding greenhouse gas emissions. So questions often arise on metrics and targets disclosures on greenhouse gas emissions. So we wanted to address some of these briefly here. For those who might not be familiar with the different scopes, there are three different scopes, 1, 2, and 3. And the scope 1 includes all direct emissions that occur from sources owned or controlled by the company, such as emissions from your facilities or vehicles. Scope 2 includes emissions from generation of acquired and consumed electricity, steam, heat, and cooling. So, for example, electricity you purchase. And scope 3 is then all other indirect emissions that occur in the company's value chain. And in that context, it still requires company to disclose its absolute gross scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with greenhouse gas protocol corporate standards, unless the jurisdiction requires a company to use different approach. If a company is using a different method, there is a transition relief to use the method in the first year of applying the standard. So whether and how the company is using an internal price on carbon for decision making, that's another requirement from the S2 and the disclosure requirement. And thirdly, whether and how executive remuneration is linked to climate change. All right, and to that topic, we have another example. I'll be posting the link to the exposure draft and finance emissions in the chat right now.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, we're going to look at an example from a company called Enel, which is an Italian producer and distributor of electricity and gas. And this is an extract from Enel's 2024 GHG inventory. They produced their inventory as a separate report. And the report starts with a description of the company's ambition to achieve net zero emissions by 2040 and to promote energy generation from renewable sources. Now, we were just talking with Robert about scopes 1, 2, and 3, and you can see in the top of this slide how Enel breaks down its scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So you also get a comparison with the shaded graph bars to 2024 and the dark bars to 2024. So you can see the trend over time, and you can also see that Scope 3 makes up the majority of this company's emissions. Now, you get the comparative analysis, the breakdown of emissions there, but it's further broken down. The emissions are further broken down within the report. So at the bottom of the slide, we see an extract that shows the breakdown of Scope 2 emissions. The breakdown is, first of all, by business activity. So this is the breakdown of Scope 2 emissions for the power generation and other activities, which are power distribution and real estate management. Secondly, the breakdown is by source. So we can see the source from electricity consumption from the grid in power plants and from electricity consumption from the grid in terminal ports in particular locations. Thirdly, we see the comparison again between the 2022 baseline and the year 2024. And to respond to the question that's just come through in the chat, we see the breakdown by calculation method. So the location-based method for calculating Scope 2 emissions reflects average emissions intensity of the local electricity grid that the company is connected to. The market-based method reflects emissions from electricity based on the contractual terms. So that's the difference between the two. Let's so the disaggregation really is what we're showing in this example, giving it the reader a view on how emissions are made up. Let's go now to another Zoom poll. We've been talking about metrics and targets. So in the standards, what is the objective of metrics? The metrics disclosure requirements. Is the objective to enable report users to understand performance in relation to the entity's sustainability-related risks and opportunities, to understand progress towards any targets, or to understand the company's assumptions for the future? And you can pick as many as you think is appropriate. Give you a little bit more time to respond here. Yes, so there's a strong pattern, so I'm going to share the results with you now, and you'll see the majority of you have answered A and B, which is correct. Of course, the metrics might also help readers to understand the company's assumptions for the future. So if you've answered C, it's not necessarily incorrect, but the point we're making with this question is that within the standard, at the start of each of the disclosure elements, the standard sets out the objective of each of the disclosure elements. And in this case, paragraph 45 of S1, the objective of sustainability-related financial disclosures on metrics and targets is to enable readers to understand performance in relation to the entity's risks and opportunities and progress towards targets. So the point of asking you the question in this way is to encourage you to read the standard and see what the objective of each of the disclosure elements is, because it will help you craft and organize your disclosures. So we're going to move on now to the next part of the Align module, and this is about integrating disclosure requirements that you may want to disclose on in addition to the elements in the ISSB standards. It's about building on the baseline that we talked about earlier. So you might want to build on the baseline represented in the ISSB standards, because there are listing requirements that apply to you and or companies in your supply chain. Because there are policy objectives in your jurisdiction that are aimed at promoting sustainability and maybe offer incentives like tax cuts, etc. for sustainable activity. You may want to align your disclosures with industry standards and practices, or you may want to respond to the information needs of other stakeholders. And we're going to talk about how this is done in addition to what's required by ISSB standards. Just to let you know, though, we mentioned this earlier, that the IFRS Foundation has a regulatory implementation program, which is a program whereby they engage with jurisdictions around the world about progressing adoption of the ISSB standards. It says on this slide there are more than 20 that have committed to using ISSB standards, but I think now it's possibly more like 30, as we heard from an ISSB board member earlier, but in a different presentation. But if you want to know more, there's a link to the IFRS jurisdictional sustainability consultations where you can follow the progress of that. Now, because the ISSB recognises that companies are disclosing against other frameworks, as well as ISSB standards perhaps, they form strategic relationships to support what they describe as interoperability between the ISSB standards and other frameworks. We've already talked about the fact that the CDP has aligned its climate questionnaire with ISSB standard S2. The greenhouse gas protocol is the protocol that must be used for calculating greenhouse gas emissions under IFRS S2, and the ISSB works closely with the greenhouse gas protocol team, both on governance arrangements but also on updates to the protocol standard. We've talked already about the relationship with the GRI, which seeks to deliver this seamless sustainability reporting system for companies that want to report to or have to report to ISSB and GRI. We've also talked about the fact that the Transition Plan Task Force disclosure materials are now the responsibility of the ISSB. And ISSB is working closely with the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures to build on their recommendations about biodiversity, ecosystem services, and nature-related disclosures. Just to say briefly about the GRI and IFRS, we've already mentioned this, but one of the things they've done to support interoperability is to produce a comparison between the GRI and ISSB standards requirements on Scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. They've concluded that they're very similar, and you can find more details in the document that's thumbnailed on the left. And they're collaborating further to deliver full operability, in particular on the biodiversity standard, looking at GRI standard 101. And in terms of their working together, the IFRS Foundation is a convening partner of GRI's Sustainability Innovation Lab in Singapore. Now, it might not apply so much to this audience, but I'm sure many of you are aware that in Europe, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is in force, and it is supported. Companies in scope must use European sustainability reporting standards if they're required to make disclosures under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Now, again, the IFRS Foundation is working very closely with the European standard setter called EFRAG. They've already compared their disclosure requirements on climate and have concluded that there is a high degree of alignment between them. Of course, they differ in some respects because the European standards are designed to fulfill the information needs of a wide variety of stakeholders, including those interested in the impacts of corporate activity, not just the risks and opportunities to the company. And as we've said, the ISSB may require additional information to the European standards on things like financed emissions, but that is under consultation at the moment. Main message to take from this slide is they're working very closely together with the aim of reducing complexity and duplication for companies that want to or are required to apply both ISSB and European standards. Similarly, there have been efforts to help companies that are already or would like to use the integrated reporting framework as a complementary tool to the ISSB standards. So when used together, the ISSB standards and the integrated reporting framework can help companies to give a more holistic view of their value creation process. And the document you see on the left is a guide to getting started with this, and it's has within it a lot of useful material, including dedicated frequently asked questions, a mapping tool to help you understand the relationship between integrated reporting and the ISSB standards, and also a getting started guide. Perhaps the most important thing to say about integrated reporting is that it's underpinned by integrated thinking. And it's the integrated thinking that can really enhance the quality of a company's corporate governance. I think we've got one more Zoom poll now, just to help consolidate what we've been talking about with alignment. And the question is, my disclosure objectives should consider, and you can only select one answer here, the ISSB standards only, the ISSB standards and regulatory requirements, just regulatory requirements, or all of the above and other sources of guidance. Very quick responses here, and I can already see that you know the answer. Just give you one more moment here. Yes, you clearly have the answer right. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. The correct answer is D. When you're considering your disclosure objectives, yes, the global baseline applies, but of course you must also apply your regulatory requirements, but you can consider other sources of guidance to help with your disclosures, including integrated reporting, as we've just seen, and others. I'm going to hand back to Fiona now, who's going to take us through a summary of Module 2.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lois. So coming now to the end of our second module. So I should say the second module is probably the largest in the training program. So we're more than halfway through the content, don't worry, but lots to cover in this area, I think you'll agree. So let's have a quick recap on some of those points. So really our kind of framing of this section was thinking about reviewing those 4 core content areas of the ISSB standards. So that's governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. But an important thing to remember is that these don't operate in silos. We saw in the disclosure examples that despite having those 4 separate categories of disclosure, in practice, they're all interconnected. And we also discussed how your disclosure might go beyond the requirements of S1 and S2. So, for example, to meet the needs of different stakeholders, or to meet regulatory requirements in certain jurisdictions, or also industry standards as well. So what's important to remember when you're doing this is that the ISSB standards have been purposely developed to act as a baseline. And so the building blocks approach allows report preparers to add additional disclosures on top. However, in doing so, preparers do need to be careful not to obscure the requirements of S1 and S2 as well. Okay, so we're going to go back, as you probably guessed, if you're starting to get to know the structure of this content, into another Menti exercise, which Lois has just reshared the link to again in the chat. So our exercise for this Align module is all around thinking around the key gaps that you might have in your disclosure and how you go about better understanding those. So of course, our starting point here would be to recommend that you conduct a gap analysis. And there's a gap analysis toolkit that we've shared from the SSE, which you'll find linked in the slides as well in the handout, which can support you with this, and also a simplified version of that in the homework exercise as well. So really this is about thinking about what potential enhancements you might need to make to your reporting to meet the requirements of S1 and S2. And this brings us back as well to those goals that we set ourselves earlier in the session. So we've set the objective, and now this is about starting to get a little bit more granular about what specifically you need to do to achieve that. And as well as different content requirements, there might also be additional topics, for example, or reporting processes that you need to consider as well. And even maybe organizational skill sets as well that you might need to review. So perhaps you need to recruit new team members who'll bring in the capabilities that you need. So this is just a quick opportunity to reflect really on, what do you think your key gaps are that are front of mind for you as we've been talking through the content? And it could be, as we say, gaps in your actual disclosure content or gaps in those processes. So taking a moment just to reflect really and share with everyone else your reflection on your key gap or gaps if you want to give us more than one response. So again, I see a couple of Menti answers have come through already, and we'll just have a look together at those answers. So the first couple of people who've responded, someone has mentioned that they need to empower more teams beyond sustainability to own and validate ESG data. So building stronger data sharing with clients and suppliers, especially energy related. Yeah, very interesting. So as you say, I think we've talked already about the interconnection that we need here between sustainability information, financial information, and other operational data as well. So indeed, bringing that process and connection on this topic from perhaps being housed just in the sustainability team to being embedded with your wider stakeholders, employees, etc. is very important. So I think that's quite a common thing to need to focus on. Some people have mentioned here as well, maybe risk management and metrics and target setting. I see also data quality and availability. Yes, I think that's very common that we see that is a particular area of focus for many organizations. We've talked obviously earlier in the session about the need to start to try to understand financial effects, to quantify impacts and risks and the effects of risks. So yeah, absolutely. I think building up better quality data to support you in that is often a front of mind area. Then we have maybe a lack of literacy amongst employees on the topics of ESG. So maybe needing to upskill your colleagues to get them to support you in this topic. Exactly. I see another person's mentioning capacity building there. I think that comes back to this this governance point that we started with earlier that Lois took us through as well. So, making sure that you've got the right people around the table to work with you on these topics and that they have the right skill sets to be accountable and responsible for different aspects within their areas of the business. So clarity and transparency has been mentioned as well. So making sure disclosures are clear and comprehensive. Perhaps the current situation is that they might be vague or incomplete. Indeed, so shifting as we're moving towards this regulatory compliance, towards more consistent information that's more complete and comparable. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later in the session as well. And people have mentioned maybe ownership and accountability being another challenge. And I see in the chat we've had someone sharing as well, Randa, again about climate risk planning. And Ruan's mentioned around financial effects, and I see governance integration. So yes, I think it's fair to say there's lots of different areas to tackle, maybe some common themes coming out there in areas that do align between organizations. So, I think it's good to know sometimes that you're not alone in these challenges. And I think hopefully some of the resources that we're going to talk about later in the session can support you in tackling some of those gaps. But of course, I think at this stage, what's most important is to sort of understand where you are and where you need to take action to get to a better place. So sort of thinking through a prioritized list of things that you can address is really key, and what the sequencing in of those. So, it might be that you need to make sure you focus on building your governance and, as we mentioned here, capacity with your colleagues first before you perhaps move on then to building new processes using those skill sets. Okay, so I'll just give it a second in case anyone else wants to share any final thoughts. But I think those ideas that have been shared there are all helpful, and I'm sure will resonate with others on the session as well. And I'm just checking back to the chat. I see as well about assurance being mentioned. So indeed, I think that additional level of scrutiny that assurance brings and the need to build more controls for rigorous data collection, I think is often a step change versus where we might have been in the past for voluntary sustainability frameworks. So, I think connecting in with your colleagues in audit and finance to build out, governance processes around this that will support you in building that greater traceability and assurability of information is really important. I see the question's just been asked about sharing the presentation. Yes, definitely. So that's available on the website link page, which we'll share again at another point, but you can access the handout of the slides from there as well. So I think you've mentioned a lot of the key gaps here that we'd see are quite common in many organizations. A few things I guess we'd recommend to think about as well in terms of potential gaps would be maybe new disclosure topics that you might have. So perhaps you might have started in the past reporting on climate, but if you're seeking to adopt the S1 standard, of course, you'll need to be assessing a broader range of sustainability issues as well. So thinking about your readiness to understand those topics, any industry guidance perhaps that you can draw on to better understand those issues will be key. And then I think as well, we'll come on to this later in the session, but often another change perhaps for companies from voluntary frameworks relative to ISSB is the requirement to integrate this information into the annual report rather than having standalone disclosures. So we'll talk more about that later, but of course, thinking about how you can make that shift and better integrate your disclosures into your wider strategic reporting and connect it to your financial disclosures as well is often something that many organizations need to tackle at this point. So overall, I think, as I said from this, it's good to just have a little bit of a step back and think what those gaps are, take a structured approach to sort of prioritizing which you address. And, overall, how can you evolve your reporting over a multi-year time period? So it may not be that all of these things are something you can tackle in your first disclosure, but again, being transparent and building up that disclosure plan will help you to take a structured approach to addressing these issues. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone who's shared with us again there. So I'll hand back again to Lois now, who's going to get us started on implement, and I'll reshare our slides.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, we're moving on to the implement session now, implement module part of this training. So we've talked already about what to report, and what to report is covered by the 4 content elements, but not so much about how to report. Now, as you'll appreciate, the standards are about what to report, but there is some information in them about how to report as well. So let's have a look at that. We're going to cover 3 things in this unit: how to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities, the sorts of processes you might use for evaluations the company is required to make to prepare for its disclosures, and then how to integrate sustainability disclosures into your overall annual reports. So let's get into the first part of that, which is how to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Well, as I mentioned earlier, S1 asks a company to identify all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably affect its prospects and to provide material information about it. But how do they? Because we only have one standard on climate and a general requirement standard, what do companies use if they have that there are sustainability related risks related to things like water or biodiversity or human rights? Well, the standard itself says that the company shall consider the standards of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and these are sector specific standards, and they're available on the ISSB website. So they're particular standards for the energy industries, the personal products, the construction industry, and so on. In addition, the company can consider IFRS educational material on sustainability-related risks and opportunities and on the disclosure of material information. That is quite a new piece of educational material, which is very comprehensive and could well help you. In addition, the standard says the company can consider the CDSB framework application guidance, which covers climate, water, forestry, social issues, and biodiversity. Or they can look at industry practice statements or at materials of other investor-focused standard setters. Now, you might remember we looked at an example earlier from a company called CLP, which had identified waste management as a risk, and they had used the ISSB and GRI standards for preparing their disclosures. So that was a real life example of when a company would use other guidance for developing their disclosures. On the second panel in this slide, having identified your risks and opportunities using different forms of guidance, what information should you disclose about them? Well, the same sources of guidance can be referred to, but in addition, companies can refer to GRI standards and European sustainability reporting standards to help them. Let's have a look now at an example of an approach used for risk identification by a company called Ayala. And Ayala is a Philippines-based conglomerate, lots of different businesses, property development, banks, healthcare, technology, and so on. As you can see, their process starts with communication and consultation. So they discuss the risks, action plans, and management processes at various stages with different stakeholders, including senior people within the company and outside the company. The first part of their process, which is then based on the communication and consultation, is to establish the context, the risk context. So they look at internal and external factors that affect the risk landscape. And we can see that who is in charge. They have the enterprise risk management team in charge of that part of the risk process. So they communicate and consult, establish the context, then they move on to risk assessment. So they have a process for identifying, analysing and evaluating the risks and opportunities, again managed by the enterprise risk management team in collaboration with risk owners. They then move on to determining what the risk treatment should be. So what should they do about the risk? And finally, they have a monitoring and review process. So that was an example from Ayala about their process. And let's move on now to an example from a company called Nest. Now, Nest is based in Finland and it's a producer of sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel and feedstock solutions for the chemical industry. This extract comes from the climate section of the company's 2024 annual report. And it shows how the company identifies risks and opportunities in two different scenarios over a time horizon until 2050. So the first scenario, net zero world, is described as a world in which global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. But they look at that scenario across the world, but separately across the EU and North America. And this is because economies, of course, take action at faster pace than others. So looking at the scenario across the two types of jurisdiction recognizes that. In both cases, the company anticipates opportunities and risks. So on a global basis, they can expand into new markets and sectors. In the EU and the US, they expect their supply of renewable and circular solutions to be supported by regulation and voluntary ambitions. As well as opportunities, they identify risks associated with competition and acceleration of new technologies. They also look at risks and opportunities in a compromised climate target scenario, and that is one where climate action is slow and global warming of 2.5 to 3 degrees C is expected. In this case, the company has opportunities to differentiate itself from others by still offering renewable and circular solutions in the compromised climate world. But the risk is that the demand for those products might be constrained. And you'll notice also that the company has indicated the financial impacts of risks and opportunities in each of these scenarios. And the most positive expected impact is in the net zero world, which you might expect from a company that is producing products to support sustainability. So We've been talking a little bit about approaches to how to identify and disclose on risks and opportunities, but the standard recognises that it's quite difficult. So again, we come back to this so-called easement, whereby the standard says that a company is required only to use all reasonable and supportable information available at the reporting date without undue cost and effort when identifying risks and opportunities. So what does this mean? Well, reasonable and supportable information is specific to the company. So not just general, it's specific. It takes account of the external environment. We saw the way in which Yara was building that into their process. Sorry, it was Ayala in the example we had about them. It includes information about past events and current conditions, which the company will already know, but also forecasts. And we saw that in the Nest example, where they were using scenarios to support some of their forecasting about the effects of risks and opportunities. And in some cases, the ISSB standards set out what is reasonable and supportable in the context of particular content elements. So Fiona's going to take us through the next part of the module now.
Great, thank you, Lois. So that moves us into starting off the evaluate side of implement. So once those risks and opportunities have been identified, then the company needs to evaluate what the financial effect of those risks and opportunities are. And we know this can often be quite a daunting part of the process when first starting. So we're going to briefly review a few of the key concepts here that will help in this process. So to help investors understand a company's resilience against climate risk, S2 requires a company to disclose information about the implications of climate change on its strategy and business model. And it also asks for the company's financial and operational capacity to adjust or adapt over short, medium, and long term. So, for example, you might want to test your company's resilience to a new regulation to limit certain high emissions activities, or perhaps your company's ability to respond to changing crop yields if there are more frequent heat waves, for example. So to do this, you're going to need to use climate scenarios based on science and analyse how these scenarios will lead to the company's occurring effects. So it's important to remember that scenario analysis doesn't require you to predict the future. It's not a prediction or a forecast for what's happening, but it's a tool to test your resilience against plausible possible future events. So possible pathways or routes that may occur, but no prediction or likelihood that they're going to happen. And really just about asking the question of what if and how resilient would you be if those things occurred. So the S2 standard doesn't specify which scenarios a company shall use in the analysis, but it asks that companies use relevant scenarios and they provide information about which scenarios they've selected, and that they provide information about the assumptions that they've used in the scenario analysis. And it also includes guidance on how a company can determine its approach to scenario analysis. And this would encompass a range of practices, perhaps from starting with qualitative scenario narratives, progressing towards more complex and quantitative methods over time. So overall, the requirement here is that companies use an approach that's commensurate with their circumstances and that uses all reasonable and supportable information that's available to them at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. So let's have a little look at an example again to zone in a bit on how this comes through into disclosures. So you're probably familiar with the Swiss multinational food and drinks company Nestle, who we're using in this example. And here we can see one output from their climate scenario analysis, which covers their potential impact of physical climate changes on the yield of 12 of their key agricultural commodities. And so here they're projecting potential impacts on their crop yields for these commodities under a medium emissions scenario out to 2024. And the analysis shows where there might be potential increases or decreases in yield as a result of, for example, heat waves, droughts, water stress, etc. in different parts of the world. And overall, what they conclude from this analysis is that the availability and quality of their key raw materials could be affected, which might lead to higher price volatility and input costs, and overall reduces the stability of their supply chain. So in the disclosure that sits alongside this visual, they go on to summarize the key outcomes from this analysis for different areas of their business and the steps that they're taking to improve their resilience. So, for example, they've set out potential impacts on their business model, their strategic and financial planning, and how they're taking action, for example, in improving operational efficiency and product innovation and R&D to leverage improvement opportunities to increase their resilience. So, of course, when you're anticipating future material events, that can be highly challenging. So, to help with determining this, IFRS S1 asks you to consider a number of issues to help you with this. So, you can think of the list here as identifying all the steps and information needed to come to your judgment. So, for example, companies should be considering all low probability but high impact events, so not forgetting about those. They should think about the uncertainties that there might be relating to their future cash flows, and they should be seeking to evaluate and provide transparency on that. And another important point here is that this needs to be reassessed each reporting period. So whilst, of course, those uncertainties are recognised and they're inherent in this, it's just important that you are transparent and you continue to assess and provide disclosure on what those uncertainties are. Okay, back to you, Lois, for Integrate.
Thank you. Yes, so we saw when we did the last Menti exercise, some of you were commenting about the processes already used for sustainability reporting and other disclosure. And this is what we're going to look at now in this Integrate model. We're going to look at the considerations that apply when you are creating new processes for sustainability disclosure or adjusting existing processes. And the good news about this part of the training is that often you will find that within your company there are existing systems and processes that can be used for sustainability reporting, even if you haven't started with it yet. The processes are there to help you. So when considering whether and to what extent existing systems and processes can be used, the type of considerations management can consider are doing a gap analysis, for example, to check whether there are gaps in existing systems and processes. Also check on the suitability and prioritization criteria used by existing processes for establishing and identifying sustainability related risks and opportunities and their severity. And you might need new criteria here because probability, for example, may not be sufficient for sustainability related risks because of their characteristics. You might want to add other criteria like likelihood, impact, vulnerability, and speed of onset. Then consider whether the company's controls framework is suitable for sustainability reporting, and which contributors from internal departments and external experts need to contribute to the development of your sustainability disclosures. They might come from risk management, company secretarial, the internal audit team, etc. So consider who is contributing to the process. And what are the interconnections between those departments and between the different internal and external factors that you take account of when using the systems and processes that you have or develop for sustainability disclosure. Also consider what are the uncertainties associated with sustainability related risks and opportunities and disclosure. And of course, the uncertainties might be more in number and type than those that you otherwise encounter in normal corporate reporting. And finally, consider what resources are already in place or that you might need to seek in order to develop systems and processes or create new ones. So might you need to go through a budget approval process, for example. So when you've been through all of these considerations, it's an idea to consider developing a disclosure plan. It's a great way to integrate sustainability related risks and opportunities and disclosure requirements into the organization's existing practices and processes. Now, you've probably seen as well that developing a disclosure plan is the homework that we recommend for you, because it helps you to consolidate a lot of what we're talking about. It can help take control of the company's narrative. So rather than asking for general information, the standards ask about the company, about its strategy, the targets it sets, its governance arrangements, and so on. So rather than preparing a general disclosure, the disclosure plan can help you be very specific about the narrative that applies to your company. What are your company's reporting goals and objectives? What laws and standards apply to your company? What do you want to communicate about management strategies? The disclosure plan can also help to support internal collaboration between the types of teams we've already talked about, between internal audit, company secretarial, the risk team, the finance team, and so on, and can also help to manage how discussions between those teams will take place. It can help you decide how responsibilities are going to be allocated between those different departments, how data will be sourced. Will you use existing systems and controls, or will assurance be obtained from a third party, and if so, whom? What are your sign-off procedures, and so on. And finally, a disclosure plan acts as a reference point and an audit trail for you. So you've got a central record of how you approach disclosures, who is involved, where and how judgments have been made, who provides the assurance, who does the sign-off, what are the objectives, and so on. So we're going to look at an example now of, they don't call it a disclosure plan, but this company Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish pharmaceutical company, has set out the basis of the preparation for their sustainability statement, which gives us information about lots of the elements I've just mentioned. So in this basis for preparation disclosure plan type example, the company sets out the regulations, standards, and practices that it has chosen to or must use for its disclosures. And you see the list of those in the second paragraph then. They tell us the approach and scope they've used for data collection and verification of the information they report, why and how changes have been made to their reporting, how errors have been corrected in the by using restatements, for example, for previous periods, which time horizons have been considered for the preparation of the sustainability report, and they actually define what they mean by short-term, medium-term, and long-term. They tell us how estimates have been used and where to find more information about assumptions and uncertainties. And there's a lot of other contextual information that helps readers understand how data and information have been provided. And agreeing this before you start the reporting cycle is useful. So, it can be very hard to collect this type of information at the end of the reporting cycle. So let's do a Zoom poll now about the disclosure plans. And the question is, you can only select yes or no. Is a disclosure plan required by the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards? You can answer yes, you must disclose your plan, or no, but it's a very helpful tool. I'll give you a minute to think about that. Participation a little bit slower on this one, so you're obviously thinking about it, which is great to see. In the interest of time, I'm going to end the poll now there and share the results. Most of you answered yes, but some of you answered no, but it's a very helpful tool. Well done to those who answered no. The correct answer is no. There is nothing in the IFRS sustainability standards that says you must have a disclosure plan and you must disclose information about it. There are some requirements, for example, metrics and targets, where you must disclose the methodology that you've used for calculating greenhouse gas emissions, for example, but there is no requirement to have or disclose a disclosure plan. We've simply suggested it to you for your homework because we think it's really useful. So I'm handing over to Fiona now for summary of Module 3.
Many thanks, Lois. Yeah, I think we've got time for this poll, I think. So let's just maybe quickly do this poll as well. I'm just looking at our timings. I think we're in reasonable shape. So our final poll question just for this section was just to check as well the purposes of a disclosure plan. So as we said, we don't have to have one, but it's an optional thing that we think can be very helpful. So a quick opportunity just to let us know which of these aspects you think is the purpose of a disclosure plan, really, and what you should be using it for. So you can select as many as you think are correct here. Okay, I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to fill that one out. See responses coming through as you're thinking about it. Okay. The numbers are slowly coming up. Okay, I think we've had a minute for the poll, so I'll end the poll there in the interest of time and share results. It looks like most of you indeed have got that right. So the top 3 reasons are indeed all good, possible reasons why a disclosure plan could be helpful for your organisation and really support your disclosure journey. Indeed, you are correct in the majority of you identifying that the final option is not a correct answer, and we don't recommend using a disclosure plan for those purposes, but good to just test that. So thanks everyone for responding. Okay, so that moves us in then to the wrap up on our 3rd of 4 modules as a reminder. So one more module to go, and we've covered a vast majority of the detailed content at this point. So well done on getting this far, because we know there's lots to cover. So just to recap on a few key points here, we've really focused a lot on connections in this module. And so we've learned here that there are many connections between both the company and its external and internal environment. And these are really what we need to focus on when we're identifying risks and opportunities. And the second thing we discussed was relating to evaluating the risks and opportunities. And a key topic that we covered there was around the consistency in your assumptions. So we talked about how scenario analysis can be a very helpful tool to test resilience, but what's really important as well is that you track the assumptions that you make in your scenario analysis and the uncertainties that arise from it, and you continue to provide transparency over those. And finally, as we've seen, even if some of this data isn't data that you're already disclosing, it may well be that you're already collecting it internally for different reasons. Or maybe you have appropriate practices in place that could allow you to start to collect it. So although, of course, some of this will be new for your organization, quite possibly, there's also likely to be things that you can build from. So don't start from scratch as much as possible. Okay, so quick time for a small Menti exercise. So this is just to reflect on the end point of this implement module. So we've talked here around identifying those gaps that you found before, and a lot of you highlighted, processes and data quality and transparency or connecting to finance as being some of your key gaps. So you've set us up well for this next exercise, which is to think really about, in particular, what are the processes and systems that you might already have in your organization that could support you in collecting this data. So maybe you can adapt those systems, or maybe you can just harness what you're already capturing through them. So we'll take a quick moment to reflect together in Menti on your thoughts on that point. Okay, so I see a couple of responses coming through here. So someone has mentioned maybe around actually speaking to internal communications and consulting with different sectors and a risk survey form. So yes, indeed. So looking at what risks you're already assessing, what you think your key risks are. Someone's mentioned about repurposing financial data for sustainability reporting. So, as you say, similarly to using how carbon reporting is done according to the GHG protocol. Yes, exactly. So when you're understanding what those emission sources and underlying activities are that give rise to emissions, often you're asking for financial information in terms of energy costs, supplier spend, waste, waste expenditure, or purchase goods and services. So, I think, as you say, quite often that operational activity information that underlies these things will then help you to understand better sustainability issues. So someone's mentioned using data collection software is recommended. So they are using a system already, but it has limited capacity. So having to be acquainted with new platforms, perhaps, that would exist to support you. So indeed, so it's a tricky point that where you may have a reporting system already, and perhaps you're realizing that the requirements that we're now talking about might require an evolution. So I think working with a platform provider, if you already have one, to understand maybe if it's in their roadmap to build more capabilities in this area, or indeed, asking for that might help. But of course, as you say, you might need to assess whether they are the right provider or what new options there might be that could support you there. Some people have mentioned here as well about using internal audit and compliance information. Indeed, so maybe, although it might not be badged as a sustainability audit, of course, the topics that you're talking and auditing within the business may well be very relevant here and already highlight relevant risks or areas of weaker control that need to be considered. Someone's mentioned about financial reporting systems to get HR employee data, maybe looking at employee engagement or HSE and operational monitoring systems, and some good examples there. So that's fantastic. So I think that's helpful, definitely, and just a good reflection point. I think the point that's coming through from this is indeed what we wanted to highlight, which is there's so much data that you likely already have in your organization. We recognize often the challenge can be really understanding what is already there, but I think once you have access to that, hopefully you can see that it will be definitely helpful to inform the reporting that you need to do for this topic. Okay, brilliant. So that brings us up to the end now, of module 3, and we're going to be handing over now to Vanessa, who's going to take us into the communicate module. So over to you, Vanessa.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. So we are now moving on to the final unit of this training, which focus on the when and where of disclosure of sustainability-related financial information. As with the last unit, we have 3 main sections. To get us started, we will look at the location. In this session, we are looking to clarify where sustainability disclosures should be located. Before we dive into the specific requirements, let's think about sustainability disclosures in the context of a complete reporting package that is useful to investors. As shared by Dr. Mia earlier in the keynote speech, investors are now having increasing demand for sustainability disclosure from the corporates. Investors already have access to a company's financial statements. ISSB standards are designed to identify sustainability-related risks and opportunities that complements the financial statements. These all come together on a reporting package that we call general purpose financial reports. The requirements in ISSB about what information to report are based on existing sustainability reporting regimes. Focus on investor information needs and on aspects of financial accounting standards. GRI standards expand sustainability metrics relevant to broader social metrics. ISSB and GRI reporting standards share some content requirements, such as what to report. However, the ISSB standards are focused only on investors' information needs and decision-making. Reflecting the mission of the IFRS Foundation, and our mission is to bring transparency, accountability, and efficiency to capital markets around the world. Both organizations take different approaches to define materiality, but they are not competing. The GRI approach is set out and understood among sustainability practitioners, whereas the IFRS approach is familiar to accountants and relies heavily on management judgments, which align with existing corporate risk management process. And together, these frameworks enable companies to meet the growing demand for transparent, consistent information across financial and non-financial dimensions, aligning both investor priorities and broader social expectations. Let's highlight a simple example. The simple example is where a double materiality assessment identifies that some of the company's impacts may also create sustainability risks, which could be so significant that they are important to disclose to investors. Moving on, as we just noticed, materiality has different definitions for different reporting standards and audience. So let's briefly recap what we mean by material information for the IFRS. In identifying material information to be disclosed, a company will first need to identify the sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably to be expected to affect its prospects. Once the company has identified those risks and opportunities, it can be determined what information to provide about those risks and opportunities. This is where our materiality definition comes in play. The definition of material information used in S1 is based on and aligned with definition found in the IFRS accounting standards, which is it's important. It is information that, if omitted, misstated, or obscured by other information, could reasonably and expected to influence investors' decisions. In other words, ISSB standards seek to identify disclosure of key information that matters to investors. An entity determines what constitutes a sustainability-related risk and opportunity based on its facts and circumstances. Entities often have well-established processes for identifying, assessing, and responding to sustainability-related risk and opportunities as part of the management of their business. Moving on, investors have asked for disclosure for material information, and the ISSB standards have been designed to help you gather and disclose it. However, this means that a company does not need to disclose information that is not material, even if the standards include it as a specific requirement. There are three things to remember. Firstly, remember to ensure material information is clearly identifiable and that you are plain language. And secondly, ensure material information is not scattered across your disclosure. And thirdly, include any additional or non-material disclosures if required by your regulators, but ensure it is clearly identified as such. Above all, the IFRS has also recently released further education material providing guidance for companies on identifying and disclosing material information on sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And we highly recommend you to take a further look. So now let's take a pause here and take another sample for refreshing our understanding of material information. So the question is, the information could be disclosed in the annual report when applying ISSB standards if A, omitting that information could reasonably be expected to influence investors' decisions, and B, it could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flows, and C, exemplifies the values of the leadership team. So select all that apply. So I can see like there are growing participation now. I can see the trend, like more and more people will select A and B. And let's wait another like 5 seconds to get more results. Okay, I think we can stop now. So we can see like most of you have chosen like A and B. So the correct answer is A and B. So for the option C, unless it has been determined that the particular values being exemplary are expected to have a financial effect to the company, this may not be the information that is necessary. Okay, moving on. Disclosure under the ISSB standards has to accompany the financial statements and be part of the same general purpose financial reporting package. However, S1 does not say where in the reporting package the information shall be provided. This is designed to allow jurisdiction-specific requirements on the location of reporting. The most important factor to consider here is to ensure that sustainability disclosures are provided as part of the same reporting package as the company's financial statements. Sustainability disclosures must be provided at the same time as the related financial statements, cover the same reporting period as the financial statements, and authorized by the same body or with individual authorizing the financial statements. And moreover, research by the WBCSD on the state of integrated reporting shows that nearly 2/3 of companies continue to put sustainability information in the standalone reports. However, the ISSB standards require material information related to financial disclosures to be included with the general purpose financial statement reports. This suggests that many companies have some way to go to get their internal process and disclose plans aligned. Now let's invite Louis for further example.
Thank you, Vanessa. This example is from Ayala again. It's the Philippines-based conglomerate company. And it's showing the way in which they organize their reporting amongst other things. So you can see this is an integrated report. So going back to what we were discussing earlier, they've used integrated reporting to help them organize their report. And this is an example of how companies integrate different information into one annual report. So you can see that using a value creation framework, the types of capitals that are inputs to that business are described down the left-hand side with little symbols to indicate them, so that wherever they appear in the report, these symbols indicate which type of capital they're talking about. Regarding the contents, if you look at the orange circle in the center, you can see the page numbers that tell us where to find information about the key company's outlook, material topics, stakeholders, strategy, business activities, and risks and opportunities. And again, with strategy, the little icons, the first one under vision pillar relates to the value generated under focused execution on the right-hand side there. So in addition to the integrated reporting value creation framework, the use of page numbers to indicate where further information can be found, and the use of icons, we see how this company has organized its information within an integrated report. Of course, this is in a PDF. This extract was taken from a PDF, but digital reporting is also emerging, and Vanessa's going to tell us about that now.
Thank you, Louis. So as we all know, technology is an emerging consideration for disclosures. Increasingly, corporate reporting is moving from PDF reports towards information on web pages with structured data sets, such as those databases offered by Stock Exchange. The IFRS Foundation has created the ISSB taxonomy, which reflects the requirements and accompanying materials of the ISSB standards. So the taxonomy does not introduce any new requirements. A digital taxonomy provides the common elements or text needed to make your sustainability disclosures machine readable. This makes it easier to take large data sets, like information from an entire industry and bring them all together to analyze them. There are a number of benefits with digital reporting. Firstly, it makes the reported information easier to use for analysis. Data is structured the same across business in a machine-readable formats. Secondly, tagging information potentially allows for automated checks for quality and consistency. And thirdly, more and more data connection and management systems are compatible with digital reporting taxonomies, which improve processing and report preparation. And lastly, text can have labels and descriptions in multiple languages. If you report your quantitative data in one language, someone speaking another language can also understand what it means. Moving forward, following our discussion on the location and timing, let's now think about ensuring efficient disclosures. We have added this to our training because there are common comments we find from companies is that there is a growing reporting burden. What we hope to highlight here is, when done correctly, efficiencies can be made to reduce that burden. First of all, it's important to understand what effective information looks like and what it is required. Often, companies think that if they just put all the information they have into one report and that everyone will be satisfied. However, this would be against the core concepts, in particular, fair presentation. For example, it could be helpful to ask these questions. Firstly, is the information clear and concise? What we mean by clear here is clear might depend on the nature of the information. For example, whether it could be clearer to present information in tables, graphs, diagrams, and also additional text. And secondly, concise. What we mean by concise here, to be concise, disclosures need to avoid boilerplate information, unnecessary duplication of information, and to use clear language. Some preparers watching today might be thinking to themselves that they still don't see what all the fuss is about. Perhaps their experience focuses on standalone sustainability reports, or they haven't had much interaction with their external audit. To the accountants watching, I will say there is to be kind to your colleagues. Help them understand the difference in rigor and that's required in data connection, oversight, sign-off for financial statements. This means, for example, firstly, disclosures include comparative information and are to be restated as necessary. Secondly, disclosures avoid unnecessary duplication and cross-reference as required. Thirdly, information has to be material, to be connected and aggregated or aggregated appropriately. As you may have already noticed, there may appear to be some overlap in the disclosure topics. For example, you might have the same governance approach for all sustainability issues rather than duplicate certain information. You can use cross-referencing to enhance efficiency of your disclosures. Cross-referencing to other reports is permitted as long as the other report is available on the same terms and at the same time as the sustainability disclosures. The cross-referenced information is assumed to become part of the reporting package. Cross-referencing shall be applied consistently and transparently. It shall be resulted in the information becoming more difficult to understand. Now let me invite Louise again for further examples.
Thank you, Vanessa. And this is an example from a company called ArcelorMittal, which is a steel manufacturing company. And it's an example showing what cross-referencing can look like. And it's from their 2024 sustainability report. And it's showing where you can find cross-references to information that should be disclosed according to IFRS content elements and concepts. So you see the content elements listed down the left-hand side of the table here. And then for each content element, for governance, for example, you can see that they refer you to where the cross-reference for information is. So governance and risk management within the 2024 sustainability report. So sometimes they're cross-referencing within the report, but other times they're cross-referencing to the annual report or to the Form 20F. So this company has chosen to illustrate how they're cross-referencing within and to external reports using a table. So back to you now, Vanessa.
Thank you. So we have also applied a number of mechanisms to support preparers get started with the ISSB standards. Firstly, one simple thing put in place was to adopt well-known terminology and concepts familiar to preparers, borrowing from IASB, for example. And secondly, many requirements in S1 and S2 are to be applied proportionately, recognizing companies will have a range of capabilities and preparers on these issues, such as qualitative scenario analysis is permitted. And you will see the phrase all reasonable and supportable information at the reporting dates without undue cost or efforts, or commensurates with skills, capabilities, and resources in a number of places. And thirdly, reliefs for the first year of application have also been introduced and include companies being able to limit disclosures to climate in year one and begin reporting on the other sustainability related risks and opportunities in year two. And secondly, companies being able to provide annual sustainability related financial disclosure with their next half year reporting rather than at the same time as their financial statements. Thirdly, companies not needing to provide disclosures about Scope 3 GHG emissions apply the GHG protocol's corporate standard to measure emissions if they are already using a different measurement approach, or provide comparative information in their first year of reporting using S1 and S2. And another relief allows companies to include GHG emissions information obtained from companies in the value chain with a different reporting cycle. And lastly, we have already mentioned a number of other sources of guidance and resources, and we have also posted it in our chats. And we will highly mentioned there are other resources of guidance, resources such as ISSB standards, CDSB framework, application guidance, among many others. Above all, those reliefs are designed to enable companies to put in place reporting practices and structures to provide high quality, decision useful information. Jurisdictions will decide where to mandate adoption, but the standards are effective from January the 1st, 2024, and we know many companies are now preparing to adopt them voluntarily. So now let's moving on to have another Zoom poll to further test your understanding about the disclosed information. So the question is, information disclosed in accordance with the ISSB standards should be A, decision useful, B, material, C, misleading, and D, comparable. So it is a multiple choice. Select all you think is correct. So now I can see the trend line more and more, like more people will select A, B, and D. I think let's end the poll here. So the results is correct. The correct answer is A, B, and D. And so we don't need to select C. And moving on, let's have another Zoom poll on testing our understanding what is information is decision useful. So it's a multiple choice question. So information is decision useful if it is A, relevant and faithfully represented, and B, comparable, C, verifiable, C, D, timely, and E, and then understandable. Oh, let me stop the poll here. Yes, we can see the similar trend. You choosing like all the answers. So the correct answers, all of them are correct. Okay, moving on. Finally, the last session of our last unit, we look at how you can ensure that the users of financial reports have confidence in the data you're disclosing, as trust is an essential component of sustainability-related disclosures, and increasingly so with the growing concern over greenwashing. An important trust builder is showing data and trends over time. This is why ISSB standards ask for comparatives. So comparative information provides context, helps to indicate progress, and underpins strategy and risk management. And metrics disclosed by a company might be redefined or replaced over time, or the company might change its method for estimating a metric. In these situations, it is important for the company to revise the comparatives to enable investors to compare and analyze current period figures with the relevant data prior period figures. And also occasionally, a company's sustainability disclosure might contain material errors. In this situation, the company is required to restate these errors in the comparatives provided. And fourthly, revisions or restatements are necessary only when there is a risk that material information being omitted, misstated, or obscured as a result of not revising or restating the comparatives. And lastly, information can be qualitative and quantitative. So above all, companies sometimes express concern with sharing information. Then they think they're sensitive or that if shared would kind of like downgrade their competitive advantage. The ISSB standards relieve a company from disclosing information about a sustainability with related opportunity if that information is commercially sensitive. If this is a concern you might have, there is a further detail you can read in the handouts. Finally, it's important to build confidence by providing clear statement of compliance. A company that complies with all requirements in the ISSB standards, even the reliefs, is required to make an explicit statement of compliance. We also published further guidance on this in September 2024, called Voluntarily Applying ISSB Standards, a Guide for Preparers. So just take your time and find out more. Moving on, my last tip when I hand over back to Fiona is a few things to remember. Firstly, remember to work through the list. And secondly, you can find in the handout slide deck, there is additional slide in the session with reminders of how to report effectively. And I highly recommend all of you to take a look at that. Now let me hand over back to Fiona.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vanessa, for taking us through that final module. So wonderful. That brings us to the end of our final module. So congratulations if you've survived this long. We know it's a long time. We're going to wrap up now on some final points to end this module, and then some next steps and resources, and crucially your certificates. So stay tuned for those points. So just to wrap up here, let's take a quick moment to recap on what we learned in module 4. So firstly, we discussed where to report information. And what was important here was the audience, or who you're reporting to. So make sure to be clear from the start who the primary user of information is, and that will help you to ensure that this information is the right information for their needs. And as a reminder, when we're talking about the ISSB standards, investors are intended as the primary audience of this information. And then we discussed efficiency. And I think the key takeaway here would be that less is more. So the objective isn't to overload investors with detail in every possible aspect of the risks. Actually, that could be harmful because it could obscure the information that they required. So using the standards as you get started can be a good guide to make sure you're providing the information investors need, which of course is the focus and purpose of the ISSB standards. And finally, we talked there about report user confidence. So especially in the current climate where there's greenwashing accusations, you want to ensure that your data is not only accurate, but that it's presented in a way that builds confidence and trust with your stakeholders and report users. And so that's where the disclosure plan that we've been discussing can help you to do this, because if it's done well, you'll have a clear and documented process for reporting the data investors need that you can come back to. Okay, so we're going to do a quick final activity to finish this module, which is just to reflect a little bit on the different techniques you can take to present your information and support navigation. So we've talked a little bit about that in what Vanessa presented there and the examples that Lois shared. But we want to hear from you just finally on what you find most helpful to support report navigation and make that helpful. So I'll just have a quick look in Menti with you to see what your ideas are in that regard and what you find helpful. It's always helpful to know because, there's lots of different ideas out there. So someone here has mentioned around communicating effectively, using data illustration through digital reporting and ensuring comparability. A report should have the following qualities, so detailed and concise. So a balancing act to strike there, I guess. Comparable standards and industry requirements and timely. Yep, these all sound like fantastic points. So, of course, as you say, just being really clear, using the structure of the standards so that a user of your report instantly can recognize the terms and what information they're looking for is helpful. Someone's shared using an index. Yeah, we've talked there. Lois shared some examples there of sort of a content index that could help users to cross-reference and link to different parts of the report to meet their requirements. And I know we see in the chat as well, someone's mentioned not very long is good. Indeed, concise, materially focused information is the aim. We know that's often the challenge, is to get to that level of conciseness requires a lot of time and effort to distill things, but I think that's where the really important work is internally to get to that view on the material information for disclosure. And then someone said about blocks maybe with indexes and icons, exactly. So having clickable interactive elements that allow people to navigate in your reporting is great. Brilliant. So I think we'll keep that quick fire just in the interest of time. I'll move on to a final question in Menti now before we wrap up, which is just to get a sense really on where you're at with those different learning objectives that we started today's session with. So we hope that we'll be able to show that you're maybe having improved a little bit in these areas, but just take a moment to reflect, where do you think you're at now relative to those three areas of using the standards, explaining to team members what they are, and developing your reporting strategy. Okay, so I see a couple of respondents coming in. A bit of a mix, but some people feeling quite confident now, others perhaps still feeling like there's more work to do, which is very understandable. We know often the challenge with these training sessions is you kind of realize how much there is to know and how much to go away with. But we hope that, the content we've covered today and the handout that you have now available after the session to refer back to will be a good structure to continue your learning. But I'm seeing a bit of a mix. So middle ground, and then maybe some people feeling more comfortable. So that's good to see. But thanks for sharing with us. Okay, so this is kind of coming up to the end of our interactive time together. So just a few final slides from me to wrap us up before we let you go on your way to the rest of your day. So we've mentioned a few times around the homework assignment, and just to recap on this is available on the event webpage that we've shared the link to and where you register for today's session. It's a optional exercise to do in your own time to help you develop this draft disclosure plan. So the questions within the disclosure plan homework align to the exercises we've worked through here and just help you to build out your thinking and help you to continue that learning journey We hope it's something as well that you can share with your colleagues and do collaboratively within your organizations to help progress your reporting journeys. Couple of few final, and thanks all for all the positive reactions, always fantastic to see, thank you. So just to continue as well with your learning and a few resource hubs that we'd really highlight. So firstly, we have the IFRS Sustainability Knowledge Hub, which is linked in the slides in the handout, a great resource for finding all of the IFRS materials, including, of course, the two key standards we're talking about here. We then, we heard from our colleague Dr. Amira at the start of the session from the IFC perspective, the platform that the IFC have on the Beyond the Balance Sheet toolkit, which gives a lot of different resources, really helpful in particular, I think, on internal implementation, you know, how to set up your processes and governance structures, etc. So definitely recommend checking out the IFC's resources. And finally, just as another reminder, we talked about this earlier, but the SSE works very closely with the IFRS Foundation and our partners to support exchanges and their issuers on this topic. So for anyone who missed this at the beginning, we have an online toolkit that you can access here, which includes a number of different resources to support you, both on the disclosure front, so this checklist and gap analysis aspect, and also some of the climate-specific areas as well relating to transition planning and disclosing metrics. So if you follow the link there that you see on the QR code, that'll take you to that toolkit. So as I said, a big well done to everyone who stuck with us for this full 3.5 hours of training. We know that this is a long time and there's a lot to learn, so we're very appreciative of all of you who've asked questions and interacted with us throughout this training and taken part today. So as a merit for your hard work, you can now receive a completion certificate for taking part in the course. And this is certified through the UK CPD accreditation service as well. So to receive your certificate, what you need to do is to fill out the feedback survey. So Lois is going to share a link in the chat now with you to access certificate, which she's just shared there. So if you fill out the survey at the link that Lois has shared, you'll receive your completion certificate from us within about a week of taking part. If you miss the link, you'll also receive it in about 24 hours time in an email from Zoom as well. So keep an eye out for that email, which will also include this link. And then once you've filled it out, as I said, usually takes about a week to receive your certificate, but make sure to check your junk folder if you are missing the certificate, because we know sometimes it can go there by mistake. And sometimes we recommend maybe using a Gmail or a personal email address if you know that your organization has quite strong spam filters that might block you receiving your certificate. Okay, but with that, we just want to close out really, and we'll say firstly a final few words of appreciation, in particular to all of the SSE supporters who really support this work and make it possible. And then we also have some thanks, of course, to give to the IFRS Foundation, in particular Robert and Vanessa for joining us here today, our colleague Dr. Amira and the IFC for their support for this programme. And finally, of course, a big thank you to the Amman Stock Exchange for inviting you all along today and bringing you together for this session. I know Dr. Rasha of the exchange staff was unfortunately unable to join us at the last minute today, but really appreciates your time and support on this topic as well. So with that, we'll close the session, but a big thank you again for being with us, and we'll hope to see you again on a future training session. Thanks, everyone.